Close your eyes and imagine something almost impossible to picture. 4.5 billion years ago, there was no ocean. There was barely even an Earth. Not the one you know anyway. Just a ball of molten rock spinning in the darkness of space. So hot that stone flowed like water, glowing red and orange beneath clouds of steam and poison gas. There were no continents then, no beaches, no waves lapping at shores, because there were no shores to lap against. Just endless, churning heat, and above it all, a sky that would kill you in seconds if you could somehow stand on that burning ground. But the Earth was cooling. Slowly, impossibly slowly, the surface began to harden. Think of lava cooling into black glass, but stretched across an entire planet, taking millions of years. A crust formed, thin at first, fragile, cracking and remelting in places. But it was forming. The Earth was finding its skin, and then the rain began. Not a storm, not a shower. A rain that lasted for thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands. Water vapor in the atmosphere, trapped there since the planet's violent birth, finally cooled enough to condense. Droplets formed, fell, hit the hot surface and exploded into steam, rising again, falling again in a cycle that must have seemed endless. But gradually, slowly, the surface cooled enough that some water stayed liquid. It pooled in the low places, the cracks, the basins where asteroids had struck. The first puddles formed, then the first lakes, then something larger. Picture it, a world wrapped in clouds so thick that no sunlight reached the ground. Rain falling in sheets through the darkness, drumming on bare rock. Water gathering, spreading, deepening. The air filled with the sound of rain and thunder. Year after year, century after century, the only sound on an empty planet. And then, one day, there was no one there to mark the day. The rain slowed, the clouds thinned, and beneath them lay something new, a body of water stretching to the horizon. Dark still, reflecting nothing but clouds. The first ocean. It wasn't blue yet. The sky was still orange and gray from volcanic gases. The water was probably greenish, full of dissolved minerals. Acidic, hot. Nothing lived in it, nothing could. But it was there, water covering rock. The ocean floor meeting the ocean for the first time in silence, in darkness, with no witness, but the cooling earth itself. This is where our story begins. In a moment, 4 billion years ago, when water first touched stone and stayed there. When the ocean floor was born, ready to catch everything that would fall upon it for the next 4 billion years. Every grain of sand, every living thing. The floor was patient then, and it is patient now, waiting at the bottom of the world for us to explore its quiet history together. Where did all that water come from? It is one of the most beautiful mysteries in science, and no one knows the answer for certain. There are theories, of course, good ones, but at the heart of it, the origin of Earth's oceans remains a question mark wrapped in wonder. Some scientists believe the water came from space. Imagine comets, dirty snowballs hurtling through the solar system, made of ice and rock and frozen gas. For millions of years after Earth formed, comets crashed into it. Dozens every day, maybe hundreds. Each one brought ice. Each impact vaporized that ice into steam, which rose into the atmosphere and eventually rained down. Delivery by delivery, comet by comet, the ocean arrived from the outer solar system, like a gift from the dark. It is a beautiful idea that the water you drink, the water that makes up most of your body, the water filling the ocean, it all fell from the sky as burning ice, traveling for millions of miles just to find a home here. But there is another theory, just as beautiful. Maybe the water was here all along, locked inside the Earth itself. When the planet formed from dust and debris spinning around the young sun, some of that material contained water molecules trapped in minerals. As the Earth heated up, as volcanoes punched through the crust, they released that water as steam, every eruption exhaling moisture, every lava flow sweating vapor. The ocean, in this version, came from within, breathed out by the Earth over millions of years. Or maybe it was both. Comets from above, volcanoes from below, working together, water falling and rising, gathering and pooling, until there was enough to cover most of the planet. A collaboration between sky and stone. We may never know which story is true. The evidence is mixed. Some measurements point to comets, others point to volcanic outgassing. Some suggest a combination so perfectly balanced, it seems almost intentional. But here is what we do know. The water arrived slowly, molecule by molecule, drop by drop. It accumulated, it grew, it deepened so gradually that if you could somehow stand on the shore and watch, you'd see nothing changing in your lifetime, or your children's lifetime, or 1,000 lifetimes. After that, this is the pace of the ocean floor's world. Nothing sudden, nothing rushed, just the slow gathering of water, the patient filling of basins, the gradual transformation of a dry planet into a blue one, and in that slowness, there is something deeply comforting. The ocean didn't need to hurry. It took all the time it needed. Millions of years to arrive, and then billions more to become what it is now, deep, dark, alive with secrets. The water came from somewhere, maybe from many somewheres, and it settled into the lowest places, where it has been resting ever since, on a floor that has been waiting, quiet and ready. Try to imagine the first shoreline, not a beach, not yet, just the place where water met land for the first time and decided to stay. There were no palm trees, no seagulls, no shells scattered in the sand, because there were no creatures yet to make shells. Just water lapping against bare rock over and over, in a rhythm that had never existed before. The sky above was probably pink or orange, thick with volcanic gases. The sun yonder then, slightly dimmer, would have looked strange through those clouds, if it was visible at all. The moon hung closer in the sky, bigger than it appears now, pulling tides that were stronger, faster, more dramatic than any tide today. And every 6 hours or so the water rose and fell, not because anything living needed it to, not because it served any purpose, just because the moon pulled and the water responded and the shore became a place of change. Wet, then dry, then wet again. The first rhythm on a planet that would eventually be full of rhythms, heartbeats and seasons and migrations and breath. But this first rhythm was simple, water forward, water back, rise and fall, the ocean touching the land and then pulling away endlessly, in silence. What did the water sound like? Probably not like the ocean you know. There were no waves breaking, not yet. The ocean was still, almost flat, disturbed only by the tides and occasional storms. But even still, water makes a sound when it moves against rock, a soft lapping, a whisper, the same sound you hear when you dip your hand into a calm lake and pull it out slowly. That sound, quiet, repetitive, gentle, was the only sound in the world for a long time. No wind through trees, because there were no trees. No rain on leaves, no insects buzzing, no birds calling, no distant thunder of herds running. Just water meeting stone, over and over, patiently wearing it smooth, and the ocean floor extended from that shore, sloping down, down, down into darkness. Even then, in that first ocean, there were deep places, trenches where the floor dropped away, ridges where it rose, mountains that would never break the surface. All of it submerged, all of it silent, all of it waiting. If you could stand on that first shore, protected somehow from the toxic air, from the heat, you'd see water stretching to the horizon. Dark water, maybe slightly green, definitely strange. And you'd hear that sound, the gentle, endless lapping of the first waves against the first shore. No one was there to see it, no one was there to hear it. But it happened anyway. The ocean met the land and the floor met the ocean, and the long, slow conversation between water and stone began. A conversation that is still happening now, billions of years later. The first rhythm, the oldest sound, still playing even now, while you rest. Now let's sink beneath that surface, down below the first waves, into the dark water pressing against the floor. Light doesn't travel far in water. Even in the clearest modern ocean, sunlight fades within a few hundred feet, and below that, there is only darkness. In that first ocean, cloudy with dissolved minerals, full of iron and sulfur and volcanic debris, the darkness would have started even sooner, just a few dozen feet down. The light would have been gone completely, and in that darkness, the ocean floor lay waiting. It was made of basalt, mostly black volcanic rock, freshly cooled, rough and sharp. In some places, where tectonic forces were pulling the crust apart, magma still oozed up through cracks, glowing dull red in the blackness before cooling into new stone. The floor was being born constantly, spreading outward from these rifts, growing slowly like a scar across the Earth's skin, and onto this floor, things began to fall. Dust from the atmosphere, settling through the water like slow snow. Volcanic ash from eruptions on land, drifting down in clouds. Tiny crystals of minerals precipitating out of the water itself, calcium, silica, iron, each one microscopic. But countless numbers of them, drifting down day after day, year after year. This was the beginning of sediment, the first layer of what would eventually become miles of accumulated history. Each grain told a tiny story: where it came from, what conditions allowed it to form, how long it took to fall, and the floor caught it all, held it all, began building its archive. Think of the ocean floor as a library. But instead of books on shelves, it is layers of mud and sand and tiny shells and volcanic glass, stacked one on top of another, each layer representing a chapter in Earth's history. The oldest layers at the bottom, the newest at the top. Everything preserved, everything remembered. Even in that first ocean, with no life yet, the floor was already recording. Recording the chemistry of the water: was it acidic or basic? Recording the temperature: was it hot or cold? Recording the weather on land: were there storms producing ash or calm periods producing only fine clay? The floor didn't choose what to remember. It remembered everything indiscriminately, patiently, without judgment. Grain by grain, layer by layer, the archive grew. And in the deepest parts of that first ocean, where the floor dropped into trenches and canyons, the darkness was absolute. No light had ever reached there. No light ever would. These were the first truly dark places on Earth. Darker than any cave, because even caves are vents where light creeps in. But the deep ocean floor, pure, permanent, eternal darkness. And yet it wasn't empty. Even then, it was accumulating, gathering. Holding the floor was already doing what it would do for the next 4 billion years, catching everything that fell, pressing it flat, turning it into stone, keeping it safe in the dark. This is where time goes to be stored. This is where the past becomes geology. There is something you need to understand about the ocean floor, something that makes it different from almost anywhere else on Earth. Time moves differently there. Not literally, of course. A second on the ocean floor is still a second. But the pace of change, the speed at which things happen, is so slow that it might as well be a different kind of time altogether. Mountains rise and erode on timescales of millions of years, which sounds slow, but compared to the ocean floor, it is frantic. On the ocean floor, nothing rushes. A single grain of sediment, a particle of clay, maybe washed into the ocean from a river might take months to drift down through the water column. Months of falling, so slowly you couldn't see it move if you watched. And when it finally lands on the floor, it is joined by other grains, one at a time, building up at a rate of perhaps a millimeter per 1,000 years. Think about that. A millimeter, less than the thickness of a dime, taking 1,000 years to accumulate. At that pace, the sediment layer you'd need to bury a coin completely might take 10,000 years to form. A layer thick enough to bury a house, hundreds of thousands of years. A layer a mile thick, tens of millions of years. This is the pace of the ocean floor. This is the speed at which it builds its history. Creatures that live on the floor, we'll meet them soon, move in slow motion. A sea cucumber might crawl a few feet in a day. A deep-sea fish might not move at all for hours, just hanging in the water, waiting. Even hunting happens slowly down there, with predators and prey drifting past each other like partners in an underwater ballet choreographed over millennia. The floor itself moves, but only barely. Tectonic plates slide across the mantle at about the speed your fingernails grow, an inch or two per year. In a human lifetime, a piece of ocean floor might move a few feet. In a million years, it might cross an ocean, but from moment to moment, it is essentially still, and there is something deeply peaceful about that. In a world that feels like it is speeding up, where information moves at the speed of light, where change happens overnight, where everything is urgent and fast, and now the ocean floor offers a different model. It suggests that important things can happen slowly, that patient accumulation matters, that stillness is not the same as inactivity. The floor is always working, always gathering, always recording. It just does it at a pace that refuses to be rushed. Down there, in the dark under miles of water, the floor has been doing the same thing for billions of years, catching what falls, pressing it flat, turning it into memory. It is the slowest place on Earth, and maybe that is exactly what we need to remember as we drift towards sleep, that not everything has to happen quickly. Some things, the best things, take time. Here is something strange and beautiful. The ocean floor is not a fixed thing. It is not a solid, unchanging surface. It moves. It grows. In a very real sense, it breathes. Right now, at this very moment, in dozens of places across the ocean, new flora is being born. These places are called mid-ocean ridges, and they're essentially enormous underwater mountain ranges where the Earth's crust is pulling apart. Imagine a seam splitting, slowly, along thousands of miles of ocean floor. And into that split, from deep within the Earth, magma rises. It doesn't explode. It doesn't rush. It oozes, thick and glowing, pushing up through the crack like honey, squeezing from a tube. And the moment it touches the cold ocean water, it begins to cool. The outside hardens into black glass almost instantly. You can hear it sometimes, a crackling sound as the rock contracts. But underneath, the lava keeps flowing, pushing, spreading. This is how the floor grows. Inch by inch, year by year, the ridge exhales new stone, and that stone pushes the older floor to either side, spreading, moving, like the Earth taking a slow, deep breath that lasts millions of years. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is one of the largest. It runs down the center of the Atlantic Ocean like a spine, separating the Americas from Europe and Africa. Along this ridge, magma wells up constantly, creating new floor on both sides. The western edge of new floor creeps toward America. The eastern edge creeps toward Europe, slowly about as fast as your fingernails grow. The Atlantic Ocean widens. Iceland sits right on top of this ridge, split down the middle by the spreading floor. You can visit a place there where the North American plate and the Eurasian plate are pulling apart. Stand in the rift, and you can touch both continents at once. 1 foot on America, 1 on Europe, and between them, the newest floor on Earth, still being born from the heat below. This process, this breathing, this exhaling of stone, has been happening for hundreds of millions of years. Every mid-ocean ridge on Earth is doing it, right now, in the dark, unseen. The floor is always growing, always spreading, always pushing the old floor aside to make room for the new. It is the opposite of what we usually think of as the ground beneath our feet. We imagine the Earth as stable, fixed, solid, but the ocean floor knows better. The floor knows it is temporary. It knows it is part of a cycle. It is born at the ridge, spreads outward for millions of years, and eventually we'll get to this. It returns to where it came from, sinking back into the Earth's interior to be melted and recycled and born again somewhere else. But for now, just picture it, the floor breathing, exhaling stone, growing in the darkness, the Earth's slow heartbeat, steady and patient, pumping new crust into the ocean basins, while the old floor slides away, making room, always making room. The floor is alive with motion, too slow to see, but too powerful to stop. Once upon a time, about 300 million years ago, all the continents were pressed together into a single massive landmass. We call it Pangaea, which means all Earth. One supercontinent, surrounded by one superocean. If you could have stood at the center of Pangaea and looked in any direction, you'd have seen land stretching to the horizon. No ocean in sight. All the world's dry ground gathered into one place, like puzzle pieces fitted together so perfectly, you couldn't see the seams. But the ocean floor had other plans. Beneath Pangaea, deep in the mantle, currents of hot rock were moving. Convection currents, driven by the Earth's internal heat, rising and falling in slow, churning loops. And these currents began to pull Pangaea apart. Cracks formed. Rifts opened. Magma rose to fill them. And slowly, over millions of years, Pangaea split into pieces. The pieces drifted. They're still drifting now. The Atlantic Ocean didn't exist back then. The Americas were pressed tight against Europe and Africa, with no water between them. But as Pangaea broke up, as the continents separated, the Atlantic was born. A narrow crack at first, widening year by year as new floor was created along the mid-Atlantic ridge. Today, the Atlantic is thousands of miles wide, but it is still growing. Every year, North America moves about an inch farther from Europe. South America moves an inch farther from Africa. The gap widens. The ocean floor spreads. The continents drift, and they're not moving randomly. They're on a journey, slow and inevitable, driven by the conveyor belt of the ocean floor. New floor born at the ridge pushes the continents apart, like a crowd parting to let someone through. It is happening right now. While you rest, while you breathe, while you let your thoughts slow down, the continents are moving. Not fast enough to feel, Not fast enough to measure in a human lifetime without extremely precise instruments, but moving nonetheless. Australia is sliding north, heading toward Asia at about the speed your hair grows. Africa is rotating, pushing up into Europe, slowly crumpling the crust into the Alps and the Mediterranean mountains. India, which was once an island continent, has crashed into Asia and is still pushing, driving the Himalayas higher every year. All of this because the ocean floor won't stay still, because new floor is always being born, always pushing, always spreading. The floor is the engine. The continents are just passengers, carried along on plates of crust that float on the softer mantle below. It is called continental drift, but that makes it sound aimless. It is not. There is a pattern, a direction, a slow rhythm to it. The floor spreads at ridges. The continents ride the spreading floor, and eventually tens of millions of years from now, they'll gather together again into a new supercontinent with a name we haven't chosen yet. The floor remembers Pangaea. And in between, it lets the continents wander, patient as always, knowing that what drifts apart will eventually drift back together. That is the nature of cycles. That is the patience of the floor. If new ocean floor is constantly being created at mid-ocean ridges, you might wonder, where does the old floor go? The Earth isn't getting bigger after all. So if new floor is spreading outward, something has to be giving way somewhere else. And it is. In a process that is just as important as spreading, old ocean floor is constantly sinking back into the Earth, disappearing, being recycled. This process is called subduction, and it is happening right now in dozens of places around the Pacific Ocean, around Indonesia, around the Caribbean. Anywhere an ocean plate meets a continental plate, the heavier ocean floor slides beneath the lighter continent, bending downward, diving into the mantle. Imagine the ocean floor as a conveyor belt. New floor is born at the ridge, fresh and hot. It spreads outward, cooling as it travels, growing denser, heavier. For millions of years it carries its load of sediment, its cargo of marine snow, its record of time written in layers of mud. And then it reaches the edge, the place where the floor bends downward and begins its long journey back into the Earth. It doesn't fight, it doesn't resist, it simply slides, angling down at maybe 30 or 40 degrees, slipping beneath the continent, deeper and deeper, back toward the heat it came from. As it descends, the pressure builds, the temperature rises, the sediment on top of the floor gets scraped off, crumpled up against the edge of the continent, forming mountain ranges and island chains. But the floor itself keeps going, down into the mantle, where eventually it gets so hot that it melts. And then it is not floor anymore. It is magma again. Liquid rock mixing with the mantle, circulating in those deep convection currents we talked about earlier. The same currents that will eventually carry it back toward a ridge, where it will rise, cool, solidify, and become ocean floor again. The floor that is melting right now beneath Japan might be 100 million years old. It was born at a ridge when dinosaurs walked the Earth. It spread across the Pacific, gathering sediment, hosting life, recording history. And now it is going home, returning to the heat, completing the cycle. There is something deeply comforting about this. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is lost forever. The floor is borrowed from the Earth's interior, used for a while 100 million years, more or less, and then returned to be used again in a different form. It is the ultimate recycling program, running on geological time. The oldest ocean floor on Earth today is only about 200 million years old, young by Earth standards. Everything older than that has already been subducted, melted, recycled. The floor beneath the ocean is temporary. It knows it. It doesn't cling to existence. It rides the convection currents, spreads and cools, carries its cargo of life and sediment, and when the time comes, it bends downward and returns to the fire without complaint. The floor goes home. The floor becomes magma. The floor waits to be born again. Most people, when they think of mountains, picture the Rockies or the Himalayas or the Alps, stone peaks rising into clouds, snow-capped and dramatic, visible from miles away. But the tallest mountain range on Earth is one that almost no one has seen. It is underwater, and it circles the entire planet like a seam on a baseball. The mid-ocean ridge system, the chain of underwater mountains where new ocean floor is born, is about 40,000 miles long. It runs through the Atlantic, curves around Africa, crosses the Indian Ocean, cuts through the Pacific, and loops back around. One continuous mountain chain taller than the Andes in places, longer than any continental range by an enormous margin, and almost entirely unknown to anyone who doesn't study the ocean floor. These mountains don't look like the mountains you know. They're not sharp or jagged. They're broad, gentle swells of basalt, rising a mile or two above the surrounding floor. The ridge crest, the highest part where the floor is splitting and new lava is welling up, is often marked by a valley, a rift running along the spine of the mountain. In some places, the mountains break the surface and become islands. Iceland, as we mentioned, sits on the mid-Atlantic ridge. So do the Azores and a few other lonely volcanic islands scattered across the Atlantic. But most of the ridge stays deep, hidden beneath miles of water, its peaks still thousands of feet below the surface. No one will ever climb these mountains. No one will plant a flag on their summits. There are no trails, no base camps, no helicopters ferrying tourists to scenic overlooks. Just black stone rising from the ocean floor, covered in a fine dusting of sediment, home to strange communities of bacteria and tubeworms and blind shrimp that live off chemicals rather than sunlight. The ridge is not a quiet place, despite its depth. It rumbles with small earthquakes as the floor cracks and spreads. It hisses with hydrothermal vents, underwater geysers spewing superheated water rich in minerals. It glows, faintly, in places where fresh lava oozes from the rift, cooling into new stone. But from the surface, you'd never know it was there. A ship could sail directly over the ridge, and the crew would see nothing but empty ocean, unaware that just a few thousand feet below them, the longest mountain range on Earth stretches away in both directions, disappearing into darkness. These are the hidden mountains. The mountains that don't need to be seen to matter. They're too busy being born, too busy exhaling new floor, too busy doing the slow, patient work of building the ocean basins. And maybe there is a lesson in that. Not everything important happens in the light. Not everything needs to be witnessed to be real. The mid-ocean ridges do their work in darkness, unobserved, and the ocean floor spreads regardless of whether anyone is watching. The mountains are there. They've always been there, and they'll keep growing slowly, in the dark, for as long as the Earth has heat in its core. The ocean floor is not smooth. It is not a flat, featureless plain. If you could drain all the water away and look at the floor from above, you'd see it is covered in lines, long parallel cracks running perpendicular to the mid-ocean ridges, like stretch marks on skin. These are called fracture zones, and they're the scars of the floor's creation. Here is how they form. The mid-ocean ridge doesn't spread at the same rate everywhere. One section might be pushing out new floor a little faster than the section next to it. And when that happens, the floor has to accommodate the difference. It cracks, it shifts, it forms a fault, a line where one side of the floor slides past the other. These faults are called transform faults when they're active, fracture zones when they're not, and they can stretch for hundreds of miles across the ocean floor, creating cliffs and valleys and rough terrain where the smooth, spreading floor suddenly drops or rises dozens of feet. If you were in a submersible traveling across the floor, you'd notice these fracture zones immediately. One moment you're gliding over flat basalt, and the next you're descending into a valley or climbing a cliff. The floor is broken here, shattered in a way that looks violent, but happens so slowly that violence isn't the right word. Think of it more like the Earth adjusting, shifting, finding a way to spread the floor evenly, even though the forces driving the spreading aren't perfectly uniform. The fracture zones are the floor's way of saying, this side is moving a little faster, so I'll crack here to keep things balanced. And once the crack forms, it stays. Even after the two sides of the floor have moved past the active ridge and are no longer slipping against each other, the scar remains. The fracture zone becomes a permanent feature, a line of rough terrain crossing the smooth floor like a healed wound. These scars tell a story. They tell us how the ridge was shaped millions of years ago, how fast different sections were spreading, where the stresses were greatest. Geologists can read fracture zones like a history book, tracing the evolution of the ocean floor over time. But more than that, they remind us that even creation leaves marks. The ocean floor is born in fire and pressure, and it carries the evidence of that birth with it forever. The scars don't fade. They don't heal smooth. They stay rough and visible, proof that even the Earth bears the signs of its own growth. There is something honest about that, The floor doesn't pretend to be perfect. It doesn't hide its fractures or smooth over its faults. It wears its scars openly, and they make it more interesting, more complex, more real. Growth leaves marks. Change leaves evidence. And the ocean floor, patient and scarred, and still spreading, shows us that being broken in places doesn't mean being broken overall. The floor moves on, carrying its scars, still beautiful, still whole in the ways that matter. For a long time, people believed nothing could live in the deep ocean. The pressure was too great, the cold too bitter, the darkness too complete. Life, they thought, needed light, needed warmth, needed conditions that the ocean floor simply couldn't provide. They were wrong. Life didn't conquer the deep ocean. It is not a conquest when you find a home. Life simply adapted, changed, found ways to exist in conditions that seem, from our perspective, impossible. The first organisms to reach the deep were probably bacteria, single-celled pioneers drifting down from the surface, finding themselves in darkness, in cold, in pressure. And instead of dying, they changed. They evolved different metabolisms, different ways of processing energy. They learned to live on chemicals instead of sunlight, to move slowly to conserve energy, to build cells that could withstand being crushed. And once bacteria could live there, other life followed. Single-celled organisms became multicellular. Tiny worms appeared, then larger worms, arthropods, eventually fish, jellyfish, octopuses, a whole ecosystem built in darkness, sustained by the slow rain of organic matter from above and by the chemicals seeping from the floor itself. These creatures didn't fight the deep ocean. They surrendered to it, accepted it, let it shape them into forms perfectly suited for life under pressure. Deep-sea fish lost their scales, too much energy to maintain them. They became soft-bodied, almost gelatinous, because soft bodies compress better under pressure. Their bones became less dense, more flexible. Their metabolism slowed to a crawl. Some deep-sea fish can survive for months without eating, just drifting in the dark, waiting. Think about that. Months without food, in complete darkness, in water cold enough to numb you instantly. And these fish are fine. More than fine, they're thriving. They've found a way to live that doesn't require constant feeding, constant movement, constant activity. They've learned to rest, to wait, to exist in a state that is not quite sleep but not quite awake either. Just being, just present. There is a kind of wisdom in that, in finding a way to be comfortable with less, with darkness, with cold, with pressure. These creatures don't struggle against their environment. They've made peace with it. The deep ocean is not their prison, it is their home, and the ocean floor far below them is the foundation of that home. It is where the bacteria live, processing chemicals from hydrothermal vents. It is where the worms burrow, feeding on sediment. It is where sea cucumbers crawl, filtering nutrients from the mud. It is where everything that falls from above eventually lands and gets recycled back into the food chain. The floor is not separate from the life above it. It is part of the ecosystem. It is the ground on which the deep ocean's slow, patient, beautiful life plays out. Life found a way down. Life found a way to thrive. And the floor welcomed it, provided for it, supported it, just as it has supported every living thing that is ever settled onto its surface. The floor is a home for life that doesn't need light to see its way forward. If you could sink down through the ocean, through the sunlit surface waters, through the twilight zone where the last blue glow fades, you'd eventually reach a place where no sunlight has ever penetrated. Complete darkness. The kind of darkness that feels almost solid, pressing in from all sides. And then, if you waited, if you let your eyes adjust, you'd see something miraculous. Lights. Not many at first. Just a few pinpricks, like stars appearing as dusk deepens into night. But slowly more would appear. A faint glow drifting past. A quick flash in the distance. A string of blue-green lights pulsing in a pattern. And soon you'd realize the deep ocean is not dark at all. It is full of light. Living light. About 90% of deep-sea creatures produce their own light through a process called bioluminescence. They have special organs, photophores, filled with bacteria or chemical reactions that glow. Blue is the most common color because blue light travels farthest in water, but there are creatures that glow green, red, even violet, and they use this light for everything. Some fish have lights dangling in front of their mouths, lures to attract prey. The anglerfish is famous for this. a grotesque creature with teeth like needles and a glowing bulb hanging from a spine on its forehead. It doesn't chase its food. It just waits, motionless, in the dark, while the light draws curious fish close enough to snap up. Other creatures use light to communicate. Certain squid flash patterns at each other, messages we don't understand, but that clearly means something to them. Mating signals, maybe, warnings. Greetings, a language written in pulses of blue-green glow. Some animals use light as camouflage. They have lights on their bellies that match the faint glow filtering down from above, erasing their shadows so predators below can't see their silhouettes. They disappear by glowing, and some just glow. Jellyfish drifting through the dark, their bells ringed with lights like windows in a distant building. Comb jellies trailing ribbons of rainbow bioluminescence, refracting light through tiny hairs that ripple in waves. They don't seem to be hunting or hiding. They're just beautiful, for no reason we can determine, glowing because they can. Imagine floating in that darkness, surrounded by these lights. No sound but your own breathing, no movement but the slow drift of glowing bodies through the water. It would be like floating in space, but warmer, wetter, more alive. The ocean floor, below all this, catches some of that light. Not much, most bioluminescence is dim, fading quickly. But enough that if you were sitting on the floor looking up, you'd see the faint glow of creatures passing overhead, living stars in a liquid sky. This is the garden of the deep. Not a garden of flowers and trees, but a garden of light and darkness, of glowing bodies moving through space, of beauty that exists for its own sake in a place humans will almost never see. The floor sits below it all, patient and dark, the stage on which this slow ballet of light unfolds, night after night, for millions of years. The pressure at the bottom of the ocean is difficult to comprehend. At just 30 feet deep, you can feel it in your ears. At 100 feet, you need special training to dive safely. At 1,000 feet, the pressure would crush you almost instantly. But at 7 miles deep, the depth of the Mariana Trench, the pressure is over 1,000 times what we experience at sea level. Imagine the weight of a jetliner balanced on your thumbnail. That is the kind of pressure we're talking about. Every square inch of surface down there bears the weight of thousands of pounds of water, and yet creatures live there, thrive there. How? The secret is simple, almost elegant. They don't fight the pressure, they let it in. Most deep-sea creatures have no air pockets in their bodies, no lungs, no swim bladders, nothing hollow that could collapse under pressure. Their bodies are mostly water and gel and soft tissue, materials that don't decompress easily. Water inside them, water outside them, pressure equalized. Take the Dumbo octopus, named for the ear-like fins on its head that make it look like the cartoon elephant. It floats through the deep ocean like a ghost, its body almost transparent, soft as pudding. It has no bones, no shell, nothing rigid, just muscle and water, and a small, simple brain. When the pressure pushes in from all sides, the Dumbo octopus doesn't resist. Its body simply is. The pressure passes through it without harm because there is nothing to damage. It is adapted so perfectly to the deep that bringing it to the surface too quickly would actually kill it. The decrease in pressure would cause its body to expand, to fail. The deep ocean isn't hostile to these creatures. It is home. The pressure that would kill us is, to them, normal, comfortable, necessary. The gulper eel is another example. A fish that looks like it is mostly mouth. Its jaw can unhinge to swallow prey larger than itself. Its body is thin, almost thread-like, with a long tail that tapers to a glowing tip. It drifts in the water column, mouth open, waiting for something to swim in. No rush, no chase, just patience. The deep ocean has taught it that food will come eventually, and when it does, you need to be ready to swallow it whole, because you don't know when the next meal will arrive. These creatures have traded speed for endurance, aggression for patience, complexity for simplicity. They re-energy minimalists, living on as little as possible, moving as rarely as necessary, existing in a state of perpetual calm. And the ocean floor below them is the same, calm, patient, unrushed. It doesn't demand anything from the creatures above it. It simply provides a surface to rest on, a place to land, a floor beneath the infinite dark. The pressure that would crush us holds them gently. The darkness that would terrify us comforts them. They not fighting to survive. They simply living in the way that works best for where they are. Maybe that is the lesson, to stop resisting and start adapting. To find what works in the conditions you are given, rather than wishing for different conditions. Hunting in the deep ocean is nothing like hunting on land. There is no chase through grasslands, no pack working together to bring down prey, no explosion of speed and violence. Hunting in the deep is a slow dance, a waiting game, a test of patience that can last days or even weeks. Consider the viperfish. It is a small fish, no longer than your hand, but it has teeth so long they don't fit inside its mouth. When the viperfish closes its jaws, its fangs curve up past its eyes, giving it a permanently startled expression. Those teeth are hinged. They fold back when the fish opens its mouth, then snap forward to impale anything that swims too close. But the viperfish doesn't swim around looking for prey. It can't afford to. Energy is too precious in the deep ocean, where food is scarce and every movement burns calories that might not be replaced for weeks. So the viperfish hangs vertically, perfectly still, in the middle of the water column, mouth open slightly, lights on its body glowing faintly. It might hang there for hours, days possibly, barely breathing, barely moving, just waiting. And eventually, because eventually something always happens, a smaller fish or a shrimp drifts past, attracted by the lights or just moving randomly through the dark, and when it gets close enough, the viperfish moves. Once, a quick snap of the jaws, the fangs impale, the prey is swallowed, and then the viperfish returns to stillness, hanging waiting, digesting its meal slowly, making it last as long as possible. This is hunting stripped down to its absolute essence. No wasted motion, no unnecessary risk, just perfect, patient stillness, broken by a single moment of action. The anglerfish we mentioned earlier takes this even further. It doesn't even hang in the water, it rests on the ocean floor, its body camouflaged against the sediment, its lure dangling. It might not move for weeks. It is less like an animal and more like a trap waiting to be sprung. Jellyfish are perhaps the ultimate deep-sea hunters, because they barely seem to be hunting at all. They just drift, arms trailing behind them, covered in stinging cells. Anything that touches the arms is stung, paralyzed, and slowly drawn up to the mouth. No decisions, no strategy, just existence. The jellyfish isn't even conscious in any way we'd recognize. Yet it is one of the most successful predators in the deep ocean. There is something almost meditative about this kind of hunting. It is not about aggression, it is about acceptance. Accept that food will come. Accept that you might have to wait. Accept that stillness is a strategy, not a failure. The ocean floor below all these patient hunters is equally still. It has been waiting for billions of years, and it will wait for billions more. The floor understands that not everything requires action. Sometimes the wisest thing to do is simply to exist, quietly, until the moment that demands motion arrives. And then you act once, and then you rest again. Some creatures on the ocean floor are older than most species on land. Not individual creatures, though some can live for centuries, but body plans, shapes, forms that have remained essentially unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. We call them living fossils, though that term isn't quite right. They not fossils. They vibrantly alive. They've just found a form that works so well, evolution has had no reason to change it. The horseshoe crab, for instance, has looked almost identical for 450 million years. It is older than trees. It was crawling across the ocean floor when the first fish were evolving jaws, and it is still here unchanged, doing exactly what it has always done, scuttling along the bottom, feeding on worms and mollusks, occasionally coming to shore to lay eggs. The chambered nautilus is even more remarkable. A relative of squids and octopuses, it lives inside a spiral shell divided into chambers. As it grows, it adds new chambers and seals off the old ones, creating a beautiful logarithmic spiral that has been mathematically perfect for 500 million years. The nautilus drifts through the deep ocean like a living geometry lesson. It moves by jet propulsion, squirting water through a tube to push itself backward. It has dozens of tentacles, but no suckers. It grabs prey with sticky ridges instead. Its eyes are pinhole cameras, no lenses, just a tiny opening that lets in light. It is primitive by modern standards, but it works. It has survived 5 mass extinctions, outlived countless species that were more advanced, and it is still here, drifting through the dark, doing exactly what its ancestors did 500 million years ago. Sharks, too, are ancient. The basic shark body plan, streamlined, powerful, covered in tooth, like scales, has been around for 400 million years. Modern sharks are more sophisticated than their ancestors, but the fundamental design hasn't changed. It didn't. Need to. And then there are the deep, sea sharks, the ones that live near the ocean floor in complete darkness. The Greenland shark, for instance, can live for 400 years or more, 4 centuries. It was alive when Shakespeare was writing plays. It moves so slowly through the water that algae grows on its skin. It is nearly blind. Most have parasites living in their eyes, clouding their vision. But they don't need to see. They hunt by smell, by touch, by patience. These ancient creatures remind us that evolution isn't always about change. Sometimes it is about finding what works and sticking with it. The ocean floor has hosted horseshoe crabs and nautiluses and sharks for so long that it must feel like they re-part of the floor itself, permanent fixtures in a world where most things are temporary. The floor doesn't care about novelty. It doesn't reward complexity for its own sake. It simply supports whatever lives on it, whether that life is brand new or hundreds of millions of years old. Survival isn't about being the newest or the fastest or the most complex. Sometimes it is about being good enough, for long enough, that the world forgets you were ever anything else. In the deep ocean, food doesn't grow. There is no sunlight, so there is no photosynthesis, no plants, no algae, nothing producing energy from light. And yet, thousands of species live down there, thriving in the darkness. So where does the food come from? It falls from the surface where sunlight does reach, where life is abundant. There things are constantly dying. Plankton complete their brief lives and sink. Fish die and drift downward. Whales exhale fecal matter that dissolves into particles. Jellies disintegrate. Mucus webs produced by zooplankton drift apart. Molted shells shed skin, fragments of larger organisms. All of it begins the long descent. Scientists call this marine snow, and it is falling right now, everywhere across the ocean, in a constant, gentle blizzard that never stops. If you could see it, if you could somehow illuminate the entire water column from surface to floor, it would look like a snowstorm in slow motion. Thousands, millions of tiny particles drifting downward, tumbling, spinning, slowly descending through miles of water. A single flake of marine snow might be smaller than a grain of sand. Just a dead copod maybe, or a clump of bacteria, or a bit of mucus with a few diatoms stuck to it. Tiny, insignificant. But there are billions of them, falling constantly, and together they represent the deep ocean's entire food supply. The fall takes time, weeks, sometimes months, for a particle to drift from the sunlit surface down to the ocean floor. It is not a straight drop. The particle tumbles, gets caught in currents, spins, changes direction, drifts laterally for a while before resuming its downward journey, and along the way, things eat it. A small fish takes a bite. The particle gets smaller. A shrimp nibbles at it. Smaller still, bacteria colonize it, breaking down the organic matter. By the time the particle reaches the floor, it might be 1/10 of the size it started as, or 100th, or it might be gone entirely, consumed completely before it ever touched bottom. But some always makes it. Some always reaches the floor. And when it does, it settles onto the sediment like actual snow settling on a field, adding to the layer that has been accumulating there for millions of years. The creatures on the floor wait for this snow. They depend on it. Sea cucumbers plow through the mud, filtering out the edible particles. Brittle stars spread their arms wide like nets, catching flakes as they drift down. Bacteria coat every surface, breaking down whatever organic matter arrives. Nothing is wasted. Everything that falls becomes food for something. The marine snow feeds the bottom dwellers, and their waste becomes part of the sediment, which feeds bacteria, which help break down more marine snow. It is a cycle within a cycle, slow and patient and perfectly efficient. The floor catches it all, holds it all. transforms it from death into food, into sediment, into stone, layer by layer, flake by flake, in a process that has been running continuously for billions of years. What falls must feed, what feeds must eventually fall, and the floor waits below, ready to receive it all. Let's follow a single flake, just one particle of marine snow, and watch it fall. It begins at the surface, 100 feet down where the sunlight is still bright. A copod, a tiny crustacean smaller than a rice grain, has just died. Its body, no longer swimming, begins to sink. At first, the fall is almost imperceptible. The copod is small, its body light. It drifts more than falls, caught in the gentle currents of the upper ocean. A school of fish passes nearby, their movement creating turbulence that spins the copod sideways, sends it drifting horizontally for a few feet before it resumes sinking. Hours pass. The copod sinks 50 feet, then 100. The water grows dimmer. The blue light from above fades to a deeper blue, then to violet. Still, the copod falls, tumbling slowly, end over end. A small fish, a lanternfish, one of the most common fish in the ocean spots, the copod snaps at it, bites off the tail section. The copod is smaller now, lighter, but still sinking. The lanternfish moves on, looking for larger prey. Days pass. The copod has reached the twilight zone, where only the faintest light penetrates. The water here is cold, just a few degrees above freezing. The copod's body has stiffened, its tissues breaking down slowly as bacteria work on it from the outside in. A jellyfish drifts past, arms trailing. One arm brushes the copod, and the stinging cells fire useless against something already dead, but triggered anyway. The copod sticks to the mucus on the arm briefly, then breaks free, continues falling. Weeks now. The copod has descended thousands of feet. There is no light here at all, just absolute darkness. The pressure is immense, hundreds of times what exists at the surface. But pressure doesn't affect the copod. It is already dead. It can't be crushed. A shrimp, transparent and delicate, bumps into the copod. Takes a bite. The copod is half its original size now, just the carapace and a few bits of tissue, but it is still falling. A month since the copod died. It is in the abyssal zone now, miles below the surface. The floor is still far below, but closer than the surface is above. The copod is barely recognizable, just a fragment of shell with some organic matter clinging to it. Bacteria have colonized it completely. They're breaking down the last of the proteins, the last of the fats, converting them into simpler molecules. The copod is now more bacteria than copod. And finally, after 6 weeks of falling, the fragment touches the floor, settles into the sediment, comes to rest. A sea cucumber, crawling nearby, will find it in a few days, will ingest it along with a mouthful of mud, will digest the organic matter, will excrete the shell, and that shell will become part of the sediment, part of the archive, part of the floor's eternal record. One copod, one journey, 6 weeks of falling, and now it is part of the floor forever. This is happening everywhere, all the time. Billions of flakes on billions of journeys, all ending the same way, at rest on the floor. The ocean floor is not a barren desert. Despite the darkness, despite the cold, despite the crushing pressure, it is home to a remarkable abundance of life. Strange life, slow life, patient life, but life nonetheless. And all of it depends on what falls from above. Sea cucumbers are among the most common animals on the deep ocean floor. They look like their name suggests, soft, cylindrical, cucumber-shaped bodies slowly crawling across the sediment. They move maybe a few inches per hour, plowing through the mud with their mouths open, ingesting sediment and filtering out the organic particles mixed in with the mineral grains. Imagine eating dirt to find food. That is essentially what sea cucumbers do. But in the deep ocean, that dirt is valuable. It contains the remnants of marine snow, the fragments of dead organisms, the bacteria that break them down. The sea cucumber processes huge amounts of sediment, extracts the nutrition and excretes the rest behind it in neat coils. They're the vacuum cleaners of the deep ocean floor. Slow, methodical, tireless. Brittle stars are another common sight. They're relatives of starfish, but thinner, more delicate, with long, flexible arms that can reach up into the water column. They don't move much. They just sit on the floor, arms spread, waiting for marine snow to drift down onto them. When it does, tiny tube feet along the arms pass the particles down to the mouth, at the center of the body. It is passive feeding. the ultimate in low-energy survival strategies. The brittle star doesn't hunt, doesn't chase, doesn't even move unless it has to. It just waits for food to fall onto it, like someone lying in bed catching snowflakes on their tongue. Bacteria are everywhere, coating every surface, living in the sediment, processing organic matter that is too small for larger animals to bother with. They're the foundation of the ecosystem, breaking down complex molecules into simpler ones, releasing nutrients back into the water and sediment where other organisms can use them. And there are worms, thousands of species of them, burrowing through the sediment, eating bacteria and tiny particles, creating tunnels that help oxygenate the mud. Polychaete worms with bristles along their bodies, nematodes too small to see without a microscope, ribbon worms that can stretch to many times their resting length, all of them feeding on what falls, all of them waiting patiently for the next meal to arrive from above. The floor is a place where nothing is wasted. Every calorie that drifts down gets used, eventually, by something. The marine snow that reaches the bottom is precious, and the creatures there have evolved to extract every last bit of energy from it. In a way, it is the most efficient recycling system imaginable. Death above becomes life below. What the surface discards, the floor treasures. The ecosystem runs on scraps, on leftovers, on the debris of life lived in sunlight, and it works. It has worked for hundreds of millions of years. The floor feeds its inhabitants, and in return, they keep the floor clean, keep the sediment oxygenated, keep the cycle turning. It is a partnership, quiet and slow and perfect. Sometimes something larger than a flake of marine snow falls to the ocean floor. Sometimes a whale dies. Whales are the largest animals on Earth. A blue whale can weigh 200 tons. When one dies from old age, from disease, from injury, its body sinks. And when it reaches the floor, miles below the surface, it brings more food at once than most deep-sea creatures see in their entire lives. A single whale carcass can sustain an entire ecosystem for decades. The first to arrive are the scavengers, sleeper sharks moving slowly through the dark, drawn by the scent of death diffusing through the water. They tear at the flesh with their small, sharp teeth, eating as much as they can before other predators arrive. Hagfish, boneless, eel-like creatures that look like living slime, burrow into the carcass, eating from the inside out. They can tie themselves in knots to gain leverage as they tear off chunks of meat. Within weeks, the whale is stripped of most of its soft tissue. But that is just the beginning. Underneath the flesh are bones, and bones are full of fat. Whale bones are particularly rich in lipids, energy-dense compounds that can sustain specialized organisms for years. Zombie worms, which have no mouths or stomachs, drill into the bones with root-like structures and dissolve the fats, absorbing them directly through their skin. They cover the bones like red grass, waving in the current, thousands of them feeding on a single rib. Meanwhile, bacteria colonize the bones, breaking down the fats and proteins, releasing hydrogen sulfide and other chemicals. And those chemicals attract yet another community, mussels and clams that host symbiotic bacteria in their gills, bacteria that can convert hydrogen sulfide into energy. These mussels cluster around the bones, hundreds of them, feeding on chemistry rather than on physical food. This stage can last for decades, the bones slowly dissolving, the fats slowly depleting, but always sustaining life. The whale fall becomes an oasis in the deep-sea desert, a patch of abundance in a world of scarcity. And finally, when the bones are almost gone, when the fats are exhausted, the whale fall enters its final stage. The remaining skeleton becomes a reef, a hard surface in a world of mud. Corals settle on it, sponges, sea anemones. The bones provide structure, and structure attracts life. 50 years after the whale died, its bones might still be visible, encrusted with life, providing habitat for species that need something solid to cling to. And eventually, even those bones will be buried by sediment, becoming part of the floor's archive, a layer that future geologists might find and recognize, a concentration of calcium, a change in the mud's chemistry, evidence that something large once rested here. A whale's life ends at the surface, but its death feeds the floor for generations. Nothing is wasted, everything serves. The floor receives the whale with patience and turns its death into an ecosystem, a community, a decades-long gift to the creatures who live in darkness. Death in the deep ocean is the most generous act imaginable. Everything that doesn't get eaten becomes mud. Think about it. Every flake of marine snow that reaches the floor, every fragment of shell, every grain of dust, every volcanic ash particle. Whatever doesn't get consumed by the bottom dwellers settles into the sediment and stays there forever. The ocean floor is covered in this sediment, layer upon layer, in some places miles thick, and each layer is a record, a page in a book written in mud. The top layer, the surface, is the newest page. It contains particles that fell last year, last month. Yesterday, dig down a few inches, and you're looking at sediment from a century ago. Dig down a few feet, and you're back 1,000 years, a few yards, 10,000 years. Keep going, and you can reach sediment that settled when ice covered the continents, when mammoths walked the earth, when humans were just beginning to spread across the world. The sediment doesn't just record what fell. It records the conditions when it fell. The temperature of the water locked in the chemistry of tiny shells. The oxygen levels preserved in the types of organisms that lived and died. The weather patterns on land visible in the types of dust and pollen washed into the ocean. Everything is there. If you know how to read it, scientists extract cores, long cylinders of sediment drilled from the floor and pulled up intact. They're like time capsules, except instead of deliberately preserved artifacts, they contain the accidental debris of millions of years. The cores are sliced lengthwise, and each layer is analyzed. Microscopes reveal the tiny shells of foraminifera single-celled organisms, whose species and chemistry tell stories about ocean conditions. Chemical tests measure isotopes of oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. Grain size analysis shows whether the sediment came from rivers, from wind, from volcanic eruptions. The floor remembers everything. It can't forget. It has no mechanism for forgetting. It just accumulates, layer after layer, preserving each moment in geological time. And because the floor is so stable, because there are places where the sediment hasn't been disturbed for millions of years, the record is remarkably complete. Unlike on land, where erosion constantly removes layers, where rivers cut valleys and glaciers scrape bedrock, the deep ocean floor is gentle with its archives. In some places, the sediment is almost pure white-made, mostly of calcium carbonate shells from surface-dwelling plankton. In other places, it is red or brown, rich in iron from volcanic eruptions or dust blown off continents. In the deepest places, below a certain depth called the carbonate compensation depth, the water is so acidic that calcium shells dissolve before they reach the bottom, leaving only fine clay, the slowest accumulating sediment, building up at maybe 1 millimeter per 1,000 years. But always, the floor is writing, recording. You could spend a lifetime studying a single core of sediment and never exhaust its information. Every layer has stories, every grain came from somewhere, and the floor holds it all, patiently, waiting for someone to read what it is written, in mud and time and patient accumulation. The floor is the ultimate librarian, keeping perfect records in perfect darkness. Imagine a cylinder of mud, 10 feet long and 6 inches wide, carefully extracted from the ocean floor and brought to the surface. The outside is still wet, still cold from the deep ocean. When scientists slice it open lengthwise, they're looking at thousands of years of history, compressed into 10 feet of sediment. The top is soft, almost soupy sediment that fell recently, hasn't had time to compact. Run your finger through it, and it would feel like wet clay, smooth and fine. A few inches down, the sediment is firmer, drier. The color might shift from dark brown to gray. That is a change in composition, possibly a change in ocean conditions. Maybe the ocean was colder here. Maybe different plankton species dominated. The mud remembers. Further down, a thin black layer, volcanic ash from an eruption thousands of years ago, spread across the ocean by wind and currents, settling onto the floor in a single event that might have lasted days or weeks. Above the ash line, after the eruption, below it, before, a perfect time marker. And then, deeper still, the sediment changes texture, more sand mixed in with the clay. That suggests stronger currents, or perhaps a time when sea level was lower and rivers delivered more sediment to this part of the ocean. The floor remembers the rivers, even though the rivers have long since changed course or disappeared entirely. Near the bottom of the core, the sediment is hard, compacted by the weight of everything above it. The color might be different again, lighter, perhaps, more white than brown. More shells in this layer, more calcium carbonate. The ocean was warmer then, or the water chemistry was different. Conditions that favored shell, building organisms. Every core is different. Every location has its own story. A core from near the equator will show different patterns than a core from near the poles. A core from the Atlantic will differ from one from the Pacific. The floor doesn't tell a single story. It tells millions, each one unique to its location and time. But there are patterns, rhythms, changes that appear in cores all over the world, marking events that affected the entire ocean. Ice ages come and go in the sediment, visible as cycles of colder water and warmer water species, repeating over and over. Glacial, interglacial, glacial, interglacial, the Earth breathing in and out, expanding and contracting its ice sheets, and the mud recording every breath. Scientists can date these layers using various methods. Radiocarbon for the recent stuff. Isotope ratios for older layers. Magnetic field reversals, times when Earth's magnetic poles flipped, leaving a signature in the sediment that can be matched to known dates. The floor cooperates, offers clues, makes itself readable. And once you can read the floor, once you can interpret the layers, you can reconstruct the past with remarkable precision. You can know the temperature of the ocean 10,000 years ago to within a degree or two. You can trace the path of ancient dust storms. You can watch civilizations rise and fall, visible in the sediment as tiny changes in pollen counts or lead concentrations. The floor has seen it all, and it has written it all down. In the clearest handwriting, it knows, layer upon layer of patient, permanent truth. Some of the most important information in ocean sediment comes from creatures you need a microscope to see. They re-called foraminifera, or forams, for short, and they re-single, celled organisms that build tiny shells around themselves. These shells are beautiful, impossibly intricate. Some look like spirals, like miniature nautilus shells. Others look like clusters of bubbles or chains of beads. They remade of calcium carbonate, the same material as seashells and limestone, and they come in thousands of species, each with its own distinctive shape. When a foram dies, its shell sinks and becomes part of the sediment. And because different foram species prefer different conditions, some like warm water, some like cold, some live at the surface, some deeper down. The species present in a layer of sediment tell you what the ocean was like when that layer formed. Find a lot of warm water species, the ocean was warm. Find cold water species, the ocean was cold. It is a thermometer made of tiny shells, but it gets better. The shells don't just tell you temperature through species identification. They tell you through chemistry. When a foram builds its shell, it incorporates oxygen from the surrounding water. And oxygen comes in two stable isotopes, oxygen -16 and oxygen -18. The ratio between these isotopes in the shell depends on the temperature of the water. Warmer water means more oxygen -16. Colder water means more oxygen -18. So scientists can take a layer of sediment, pick out the foram shells, measure their oxygen isotope ratios, and calculate the ocean temperature when those forams were alive. It is precise, reliable. A chemical thermometer that works on shells, thousands, even millions of years old. The same technique can tell you about ice volume on land. During ice ages, water evaporates from the ocean, falls as snow on the continents, and gets locked up in glaciers. But light water, water with oxygen -16, evaporates preferentially. The heavy water, with oxygen -18, stays in the ocean. So when there are big ice sheets on land, the ocean has more oxygen -18, and the foram shells reflect that. Reading foram shells, scientists have reconstructed the ice ages, mapped them out over the past several million years, seen the patterns emerge. Glacial periods lasting about 100,000 years, followed by brief warm periods, then back to ice, over and over, regular as a heartbeat. The shells also record ocean acidity, nutrient levels, even the depth where the foram lived. Different species live at different depths, so if you find a deep water species in the sediment, you know it sank from wherever it lived, and tells you about conditions there, not at the floor. These tiny shells, each one smaller than a grain of sand, are archives within archives. The floor collects them by the billions, preserves them perfectly, holds them until someone comes along and asks, what was the ocean like 100,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago? And the shells answer precisely and without ambiguity. The ocean was this warm. The ice sheets were this large. The chemistry was this. The forums don't lie. They can tea. They just record. And the floor just preserves. And together they tell the truth about the past. The ocean floor remembers ice ages the way tree rings remember droughts. Clearly, undeniably, in patterns that repeat and overlap, and tell a story of cycling climate. Over the past few million years, Earth has swung between two states, glacial periods, when ice sheets covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia, and interglacial periods, like the one we re in now, when the ice retreats to Greenland and Antarctica. These swings happen on a schedule, driven by wobbles in Earth's orbit and the tilt of its axis. Cycles of about 100,000 years, 41,000 years, and 23,000 years overlap and interact, creating patterns of advancing and retreating ice that are recorded in ocean sediment with remarkable clarity. During glacial periods, sea level drops, sometimes by more than 400 feet, as water gets locked up in ice sheets. The continental shelves, normally underwater, become dry land. Rivers that once emptied into the deep ocean now flow across the shelves, depositing sediment in new places. The patterns of sediment delivery change, and the floor records it. The ocean itself changes temperature. Surface waters near the poles freeze. Cold, dense water sinks and flows along the floor toward the equator. Deep ocean currents shift. Some areas of the floor receive more nutrients, others less. The species living there change. The sediment reflects these changes in the types of shells it contains, the types of organic matter, the color and texture of the mud. And then, relatively quickly, over just a few thousand years, the ice melts, the ocean warms, sea level rises. Reefs that were high and dry get submerged again. Rivers shift back to their old courses. The species in the ocean shuffle, adapt, migrate, and the floor records all of it. Layer by layer, the sediment shows the transition from glacial to interglacial conditions. You can see it in the forum species. You can see it in the oxygen isotopes. You can see it in the grain size of the sediment, the types of minerals, the abundance of certain chemical elements. Scientists have counted more than 50 glacial cycles in the sediment record of the past few million years. 50 times the ice advanced. 50 times it retreated. Over and over, the climate swinging between extremes, and always the ocean floor watching, recording, preserving the evidence. The most recent ice age ended about 11,700 years ago. Before that, ice covered Canada, Scandinavia, northern Russia, mammoths, and saber-toothed cats roamed the edges of the ice. Humans crossed land bridges that are now underwater, and the ocean floor was accumulating sediment rich in oxygen-18, full of cold water forum species, recording that the world was cold, that ice ruled the high latitudes, and then it warmed, the ice melted, sea levels rose, and the sediment shows that transition as clearly as a line drawn on paper. The floor doesn't judge these changes. It doesn't mourn the ice ages or celebrate the warm periods. It just watches, just records, just holds the evidence until we're ready to read it and understand that climate has always changed, that ice ages come and go, that the Earth breathes in cycles, measured in tens of thousands of years. Sometimes in a core of ocean sediment, you'll find a layer that doesn't belong, a band of gray or white material, sharp, edged, distinct from the mud above and below it. Touch it, and it feels different, grittier, sandier. Look at it under a microscope and you see angular fragments of glass, shards of minerals, nothing like the smooth shells and organic particles that make up most marine sediment. This is volcanic ash, and it is the floor's record of fire in the sky. When a volcano erupts violently, the kind of eruption that sends ash high into the atmosphere, the debris can travel thousands of miles on stratospheric winds before settling back to Earth. Some of it falls on land, some on water, and the ash that falls on the ocean surface sinks slowly through the water column, eventually reaching the floor and becoming a distinct layer in the sediment. These ash layers are time markers. They represent single events, eruptions that might have lasted days or weeks, but that from a geological perspective happened in an instant. Everything below the ash is older than the eruption. Everything above is younger. It is like a bookmark in the floor. S archive. Famous eruptions are recorded in ocean sediment all over the world. Mount Vesuvius, which buried Pompeii in 79 AD, its ash is found in Mediterranean sediment cores. Krakatoa, which erupted in 1883 with such force that the sound circled the Earth multiple times. Its ash is in sediments across the Indian Ocean. Mount Pinatubo, Tambora, Mount St. Helens, each left its signature on the ocean floor. But there are older layers too, much older. Ash from eruptions that happened millions of years ago, when no humans were alive to witness them. Super eruptions that dwarf anything in recorded history. The Toba eruption, 74,000 years ago, ejected so much ash that it is found in sediments all over the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. A single grey band that tells of a catastrophe so large it may have nearly wiped out humanity. And yet, in the sediment, it is just a layer, a few centimeters of ash, between layers of mud. The floor doesn't dramatize, it doesn't emphasize, it just records. This happened, and then this, and then this. Volcanic ash also helps scientists date sediment. If you can identify an ash layer, match its chemical composition to a known eruption, you instantly know the age of that layer. And if you know the age of one layer, you can estimate the ages of layers above and below it based on how fast sediment accumulates. So volcanic ash, violent and destructive on land, becomes a gift to geologists studying the ocean floor. It is a timestamp, a marker, a way to connect the deep past to specific moments in Earth's history, explosions frozen in mud, fire preserved in water, violence turned gentle by time and transformation. The floor holds it all without complaint, without fear, just adds it to the archive and moves on, waiting patiently for the next layer, whatever it might be. Not everything that settles on the ocean floor comes from Earth. Some of it comes from space. Every day, Earth sweeps through interplanetary space, and as it does, it collects dust. Micrometeorites, tiny particles of rock and metal from asteroids, from comets, from the debris of the solar system's formation, rain down constantly. Most are smaller than a grain of sand. Many are microscopic, but there are billions of them, and over time they add up. On land, these micrometeorites mix with soil and are hard to distinguish from terrestrial dust. But on the deep ocean floor, where sediment accumulates slowly and where terrestrial dust is rare, cosmic particles are easier to find. In some areas of the floor that are far from land, far from sources of volcanic ash or river sediment, a significant fraction of the sediment is actually from space. Cosmic dust is made of materials that don't exist naturally on Earth's surface. Silica in unusual crystal forms, metal alloys with specific ratios of iron and nickel, tiny spherules, perfectly round beads of rock, formed when meteorites melted during their passage through the atmosphere and cooled into droplets before hitting the water. When scientists find these particles in sediment cores, they re-finding pieces of space, actual fragments of asteroids that formed billions of years ago in the early solar system, that have been orbiting the sun ever since, that finally ended their journey by settling onto Earth's ocean floor. Some cosmic dust comes from specific events, impact layers, thin bands of sediment rich in iridium, a metal rare on Earth, but common in asteroids, mark the times when large meteorites struck the planet. The most famous is the layer from 66 million years ago, when an asteroid 6 miles wide hit the Yucatan Peninsula and ended the age of dinosaurs. That impact spread dust all over the world, and it is preserved in ocean sediment as a thin, iridium-rich layer that you can find from the Pacific to the Atlantic. But most cosmic dust is quieter. No catastrophic impact. Just the slow, steady accumulation of space debris falling like snow, adding a cosmic dimension to the ocean floor's archive. Think about that. The floor isn't just recording Earth's history. It is recording the solar system's history. It is collecting samples from asteroids that have never been visited by spacecraft, from comets that may no longer exist, from dust that has been wandering through space for billions of years. Every handful of deep sea sediment contains, on average, a few micrometeorites. A few actual pieces of space, mixed in with the shells and the clay and the organic matter. The floor doesn't separate them out, doesn't treat them differently. Just adds them to the archive along with everything else, preserving them for anyone who wants to look. You are part of the universe. The ocean floor is part of the universe, and the floor holds proof, tiny, beautiful proof, that Earth is not separate from space, but part of it, connected to it, collecting its dust and holding it gently in the dark. We are all made of stardust. The floor proves it. Water and fire are opposites. One extinguishes the other, or so it seems on land, where rain douses flames and firefighters spray water on burning buildings. But on the ocean floor, water and fire coexist. They meet without one defeating the other. They work together, creating landscapes of strange beauty. Underwater volcanoes, seamounts, dot the ocean floor by the thousands. Some estimates say there are 100,000 or more scattered across the ocean basins. Most of them unknown, unmapped, unnamed. They rise from the floor like mountains on land, some just a few 100 feet tall, others towering more than 2 miles from base to summit. Many are extinct, cold, their days of eruption long past. They're covered now in sediment, in corals, in sponges. They've become reefs, islands for deep-sea life, attracting fish and octopuses, and sharks the way mountains on land attract wildlife. But some seamounts are still active, still erupting. Right now, somewhere in the ocean, magma is rising through the crust, squeezing through cracks, pushing toward the surface. It is hot over 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, glowing yellow and orange in the darkness, beating water that is just above freezing. And when they touch, something strange happens. The outer layer of magma cools instantly. The contact with water is so abrupt that the lava forms a solid crust in seconds, a shell of glass that contains the liquid magma inside. But the magma keeps flowing, pushing forward, and the glassy crust cracks, and new lava oozes out, forming another crust, cracking again, oozing again. The result is pillow lava, rounded, bulbous shapes that look like bags of stone stacked on top of each other. Each pillow is about the size of a beanbag chair, formed in minutes, frozen in place permanently. Stack enough of them together, and you build a mountain. This is how seamounts grow, one pillow at a time. One eruption at a time. Over thousands or millions of years, the lava accumulates, the mountain rises, and eventually it might reach the surface, breaking through the water to become an island. Hawaii is a chain of seamounts. The oldest are to the northwest, worn down, eroded, barely above water. The youngest is the Big Island, still actively erupting, still growing. And beyond it, still underwater, is Loihi, a seamount that hasn't reached the surface yet, but will in a few tens of thousands of years. It is already 3,000 feet tall, built entirely of pillow lava, erupting right now in the darkness, unobserved, adding layer after layer. The ocean floor is not separate from the volcanic forces that shape it. The floor is volcanic. It is made of lava, and in places it is still being made, still erupting, still creating new stone in the cold darkness. Fire and water don't fight here. They collaborate. The water cools the lava just enough to give it shape. The lava provides heat and chemicals that support life. Together, they build mountains in the dark, patient and slow, working on timescales so long that human observation catches only the briefest snapshot. Imagine reaching out and touching a pillow lava flow. Your hand would feel smooth glass, still warm from its formation perhaps minutes ago. The surface would be rounded, bulging with a texture like tree bark, where the glass cracked and wrinkled as it cooled. Press a little harder, and the glass might crack. It is fragile, thin, sometimes just millimeters thick. Beneath it, you might feel warmth. The interior of the pillow is still molten, still liquid, insulated by that glassy shell. Pillow lava forms only underwater. On land, lava flows spread out flat, cooling from the top down, forming solid sheets or ropey pahoho textures. But underwater, the cooling is so rapid and so uniform that the lava can't spread. It bulges, rounds, forms discrete blobs. Watch a pillow lava eruption. If you could, if you were in a submersible, safe behind thick glass, and you'd see something surreal. The pillows form one by one. A glowing orange blob squeezes out from a crack in the older lava. It swells, grows, and then suddenly goes dark as the outer surface cools to black glass. The glow disappears in seconds. But the pillow is still forming. You can see it moving, very slowly, as the molten interior pushes the glass shell forward. And then another pillow starts forming next to it. And another, the lava piles up, stacks itself, builds upward and outward. There is no sound, or almost none. A faint crackling maybe as the glass contracts and cracks, but mostly just silence. No roar of flames. No hiss of steam, or rather, steam forms but is immediately recondensed by the pressure. At depth, water doesn't boil even when it is touching lava. The pressure is too great, so the lava cools quietly, almost politely, as if it doesn't want to disturb the surrounding ocean. Over time, hours, days, weeks, a pillow lava flow can cover acres of ocean floor, thousands of pillows, each one slightly different. Each one formed in its own moment, all frozen in place once they cool. The result is a landscape that looks organic, almost like a bed of giant grapes or a field of smooth boulders. And then the lava stops flowing. The eruption ends. The vent cools, and the pillows just sit there, slowly accumulating sediment, slowly being colonized by bacteria, eventually hosting corals and sponges and anemones. Walk across a field of pillow lava decades after it formed, and you'd barely recognize it as volcanic. The black glass would be covered in white and pink and orange life. The cracks between pillows would be filled with sediment. It would look like a reef, like a garden, like anything but frozen fire. But the floor remembers, beneath the life, beneath the sediment. And if you could somehow look at the floor with X-ray vision, see through the layers, you'd see the history. This pillow formed first, then this one, then that one, building up over time like bricks in a wall. The floor holds the fire gently, transforms violence into stone, gives it a shape that lasts forever. In some places on the ocean floor, water doesn't just sit cold and still. It boils, erupts, shoots upward in plumes of superheated fluid, thick with dissolved minerals. These are hydrothermal vents, and they re among the strangest, most beautiful features on the ocean floor. Here is how they work. Seawater seeps down through cracks in the ocean crust, down through the basalt, sometimes miles down, getting closer and closer to the magma chambers beneath mid-ocean ridges. The water heats up, not to boiling in the normal sense, because the pressure is too high, but to temperatures exceeding 750 degrees Fahrenheit. Hotter than molten lead. At these temperatures, the water becomes extremely chemically reactive. It dissolves metals and sulfur from the surrounding rock. Iron, copper, zinc, gold. The hot water strips them out of the stone, carrying them in solution. And then that hot, mineral, rich water finds a path back to the ocean floor. It rises through cracks, builds pressure, and eventually erupts from chimneys, structures built of precipitated minerals, growing upward as the hot water exits and cools. The chimneys can be enormous. Some are 50 feet tall, as wide as a person, built of black iron sulfide or white calcium sulfate. The tallest ever discovered was 18 stories high, a tower of stone built by nothing but hot water and chemistry, standing alone on the ocean floor. When the superheated water exits the chimney and meets the cold ocean, the dissolved minerals precipitate instantly. The water turns black, hence black smokers, thick with iron sulfide particles. The plume rises like smoke from a factory, billowing upward, cooling as it climbs, eventually dispersing into the surrounding ocean. The water is toxic, full of hydrogen sulfide, which smells like rotten eggs and would kill most life on Earth. And yet, around these vents, life thrives. Tube worms cluster near the chimneys, their red plumes waving in the current. They have no mouths, no digestive systems. Instead, they host bacteria in their bodies, bacteria that convert hydrogen sulfide into energy, producing food from poison. The worms are just homes for the bacteria, and in return, the bacteria feed them. Yeti crabs wave their hairy arms in the vent water, and those hairs are covered in bacteria. Again, bacteria that produce food from chemicals. The crabs are farming bacteria on their own bodies. White blind shrimp swarm in the thousands around some vents, their eyes reduced to mere light sensors on their backs, able to detect the faint glow of hot water, but not to form images. They don't need to see. They just need to stay near the heat, near the chemicals, near the food. These vent ecosystems were discovered only in 1977. Before that, scientists believed all life on Earth ultimately depended on the sun, on photosynthesis. But vent life proves otherwise. Life can exist on chemistry alone, on heat from the Earth's interior, on processes that have nothing to do with the sun. The floor supports life that doesn't need light. The floor is the source, the provider, the foundation of ecosystems that run on fire and poison and heat. The creatures that live around hydrothermal vents are some of the strangest on Earth. They've adapted to conditions so extreme that they seem almost alien. Organisms that thrive in boiling acid, that live off poison gas, that exist in complete darkness and somehow still find ways to grow and reproduce and flourish. Take Pompeii worms. They live inside tubes attached directly to hydrothermal chimneys, their tail ends resting in water that is nearly boiling, 176 degrees Fahrenheit, while their heads poke out into cooler water. The temperature difference along their bodies can exceed 130 degrees. They are the most heat-tolerant animals on Earth, and they survive by hosting heat-loving bacteria on their backs, bacteria that form a kind of insulating fleece. Or consider the scaly foot snail, which builds its shell with incorporated iron sulfide, the only animal known to use iron in its shell structure. The result is a shell that is partially metallic, dark and heavy, armored in a way no other snail is. It lives directly on vent chimneys, grazing on bacteria, protected from crabs and other predators by its iron plating. There are fish that swim in vent water, shrimp that see using organs on their backs, octopuses that hunt in the margins where vent water mixes with cold ocean water, mussels and clams that cover the rocks around vents, their shells gaping to allow chemosynthetic bacteria access to the chemicals they need. And everywhere, there are bacteria, coating every surface, living in the sediment, floating in the vent water itself. The bacteria are the foundation of the ecosystem. Everything else, the tube worms, the crabs, the snails, is just elaborate scaffolding for farming bacteria. It is a completely different model of life from what exists at the surface. No plants, no photosynthesis, no dependence on the sun, just chemistry and heat and microbes that convert sulfur and iron into energy. And it is ancient. Some scientists believe that life on Earth might have started at hydrothermal vents, billions of years ago, when the surface was still hostile and the only safe places were deep underwater, near sources of heat and chemicals. The first cells might have looked like the bacteria around modern vents, living off hydrogen and sulfur, reproducing slowly, building complexity over millions of years. If that is true, then vent ecosystems aren't just strange curiosities. They re-windows into Earth's deep past. They show us what life looked like when the world was young, before oxygen, before photosynthesis, when the only energy available was from the Earth's interior. The ocean floor hosts this ancient form of life, protects it, provides for it. The vents are temporary. They last maybe a few decades before the magma chamber beneath them cools or shifts. But new vents open elsewhere. The floor is always creating new homes for vent life, has been doing so for billions of years. The floor remembers how life began, and in places it is still hosting that original kind of life, the kind that needs nothing but heat and chemistry and darkness. Life around fire, life from fire, life that shows us we all connected to the Earth's burning heart. Somewhere in the Pacific, there is a seamount no one has named. It rises 3,000 feet from the surrounding floor, its peak still a mile below the surface. It was born millions of years ago in a pulse of volcanic activity, when magma found a weak spot in the crust and pushed upward, erupting in darkness, piling pillow upon pillow until it built a mountain. And then it stopped. The eruptions ceased. The magma chamber beneath it cooled or shifted, and the seamount went quiet. It has been quiet ever since. No one has visited it. No submersible has explored its slopes. No human has seen it, except as a vague shape on sonar maps, a bump on the ocean floor. Interesting enough to note, but not interesting enough to warrant a closer look. There are too many seamounts and too few submarines, and this particular mountain simply hasn't made the list. But it is there, and it is beautiful. Over the millions of years since its eruption stopped, currents have carried lava to it. Coral polyps settled on its slopes. They built skeletons. died, new polyps settled on the skeletons of the old. Slowly, over millennia, the black basalt disappeared beneath a coating of white and pink and orange coral. Now, the seamount is a reef. Fish circle its peak species that need hard surfaces, that can't live on the soft sediment of the surrounding floor. Groupers hide in coral caves. Sharks patrol the slopes, hunting. Octopuses den in crevices. The seamount is an island of life in an otherwise barren plain. At its base, where the mountain meets the floor, sediment has piled up in drifts. Sea cucumbers plow through this sediment, feeding. Brittle stars wave their arms, filtering the water. It is quieter here than on the peak, calmer, but still alive. And at night, though it is always night, this deep bioluminescent creatures pass by. Jellyfish drifting with the currents, their bells glowing faint blue, squid flashing signals. Deep-sea fish with lights along their sides, looking like distant cities moving through the dark. The seamount doesn't care that it is unnamed, doesn't care that it is unseen. It simply exists, doing what seamounts do, providing structure, hosting life, standing patient and solid against the currents. There are tens of thousands of seamounts like this one. Mountains that no one will ever climb, that no one will ever see except as data points on a map. They're beautiful anyway. They matter anyway. They support ecosystems anyway. The floor is full of these quiet, forgotten places. Mountains and valleys, ridges and trenches, all of them waiting in darkness, hosting life, accumulating sediment, participating in the slow cycles of the ocean without needing recognition or attention. This seamount will stand for millions more years. Eventually, the tectonic plate it sits on will carry it to a subduction zone. It will be pulled under another plate. It will melt. It will return to magma. And maybe, millions of years after that, its atoms will rise again at a mid-ocean ridge, become new ocean floor, build a new seamount somewhere else. But for now, it stands lonely and perfect. A mountain in the dark, home to thousands of creatures that don't know it is lonely at all. The deepest place in the ocean is deeper than the tallest mountain is tall. Think about that for a moment. Mount Everest, the roof of the world, stands 29,000 feet above sea level. The Mariana Trench, the floor of the floor, drops 36,000 feet below sea level. If you could pick up Everest carefully without damaging it and drop it into the Mariana Trench, the peak would still be more than a mile underwater, the highest point on Earth, submerged entirely, with room to spare. This is the scale we were talking about. This is how deep the ocean can go. Trenches form at subduction zones, where one tectonic plate slides beneath another. The descending plate bends downward, creating a long, narrow depression in the ocean floor. A crack, essentially, where the crust is being pulled into the mantle. The Mariana Trench runs for 1,500 miles across the western Pacific. It is about 45 miles wide on average, and in places it is almost 7 miles deep. That is deeper than any human has lived, deeper than any submarine can routinely go, deeper than light has ever penetrated. There are other trenches too, the Tonga Trench, the Japan Trench, the Peru-Chile Trench running along the western coast of South America. Each one marks a place where the ocean floor is disappearing, sliding back into the earth, completing the cycle that began at a mid-ocean ridge millions of years earlier. Standing at the edge of a trench, if you could somehow stand there, you'd see the floor drop away into blackness. Not gradually, but steeply. Trench walls can slope at 30 or 40 degrees, much steeper than most mountain slopes. They re-avalanche zones where sediment occasionally slides, where underwater landslides send clouds of mud tumbling down into the depths. But mostly, trenches are still. The walls are bare rock in places. Black basalt exposed too steep for sediment to accumulate. The floor at the bottom is covered in fine mud, the slowest settling particles. The stuff that is so light it can drift for months before finally coming to rest. And the pressure down there is almost unimaginable. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the pressure is about 1,100 times what you experience at sea level. If you could somehow bring a cube of wood down there, it would compress to half its original size. The water itself is compressed, denser than the water at the surface, but the floor endures. The rock doesn't decompress. It is already solid, already under pressure from below, already part of the Earth's interior processes. The floor at the bottom of the trenches is comfortable with the weight of 7 miles of water pressing down. It has been under that pressure for millions of years. It will be under it for millions more, until it is pulled under the continental plate and becomes something else entirely. The deepest places on Earth are on the ocean floor, and they re not empty, not dead, not void. They re just deep and patient, and extraordinarily, impossibly calm. Below 20,000 feet, you enter the Hadal zone. The name comes from Hades, the Greek underworld. Not because it is hellish, but because it is beneath everything else, the deepest layer, the place where descent finally ends. Most of the ocean isn't this deep. The Hadal zone represents less than 0.2% of the ocean floor, found only in trenches and a few very deep basins. But within that small fraction, conditions are more extreme than almost anywhere else on Earth. The temperature is just above freezing, about 34 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Not because it is winter or summer, but because this is the temperature of the deep ocean. Period. It doesn't change. Seasons don't reach here. The water has been this cold for millions of years and will stay this cold for millions more. The pressure, as we mentioned, is crushing. Over 1,000 atmospheres. A pressure that would collapse a human body instantly, that would rupture cells, that would turn flesh to pulp in seconds. And the darkness is absolute. No sunlight has ever reached the Hadal zone. No glow from the surface, no twilight, no dim blue haze. Just black. Pure, permanent black that has existed since the ocean formed, that will exist until the ocean evaporates or freezes. And yet, there is life, not abundant life, not the crowded ecosystems of a coral reef or a kelp forest, but life, nonetheless. Fish, amphipods, sea cucumbers, snails, bacteria, organisms that have adapted to the Hadal zone, that can live anywhere else, that call this extreme environment home. They re specialists. Every adaptation they possess is focused on surviving pressure, cold and scarcity. They grow slowly, reproduce rarely, live long lives. Energy is so precious in the Hadal zone that nothing can afford to waste it. The food supply is minimal. Some marine snow makes it all the way down, but most is consumed in the zones above. What reaches the Hadal floor is the leftover of leftovers, the scraps that nothing else wanted. And yet, Hadal creatures make do. They process sediment. They scavenge anything that falls. They wait, patient as the floor itself, for the rare windfalls, a fish carcass, a dead whale, anything larger than the usual microscopic particles. Scientists are still discovering Hadal species. Every expedition to a trench brings back organisms that have never been seen before, that were unknown to science. The Hadal zone is one of the least explored places on Earth, less well known than the surface of Mars in some ways. But the floor knows it well. The floor has been at Hadal depths for as long as trenches have existed, tens of millions of years. The floor supports Hadal life, provides a surface for it to rest on, collects the sediment that feeds it. The underworld isn't empty. It is not a void. It is just another layer, another zone, another part of the ocean's vast vertical geography. And the floor extends even into the underworld, patient and solid, doing what it has always done, existing quietly, holding everything gently, participating in the slow cycles of the deep. The deepest living fish ever recorded is a snailfish. It was filmed at 27,000 feet in the Mariana Trench, more than 5 miles deep, swimming calmly through the darkness, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Snailfish don't look like typical fish. They are soft, almost gelatinous, with translucent bodies and small bulging eyes. They have no scales. Scales would be too rigid, too energy, expensive to maintain. Instead, their skin is loose, flexible, more like jelly than anything else. This softness is an adaptation to pressure. A rigid body would be crushed, but a soft body can compress without damage, can let the pressure equalize inside and out, can exist in the Hadal zone without fighting against it. Snailfish move slowly. They don't chase prey. They can afford the energy expenditure. Instead, they drift, occasionally flicking their tails to adjust position, waiting for small crustaceans or worms to come within reach. When prey appears, they strike, once, quickly, and then return to drifting. They're patient hunters in the most extreme environment on Earth. And then there are amphipods, small crustaceans, relatives of the tiny shrimp, like creatures you might find in a pond. But hadal amphipods are different. Some are enormous by amphipod standards, up to a foot long, pale white or transparent, with long legs and antennae. They re-scavengers when something dies and sinks to the hadal floor. Amphipods find it, hundreds of them, sometimes thousands, swarming over the carcass, stripping it clean in days or weeks. They re the cleanup crew of the deepest ocean, the recyclers, the ones who make sure nothing is wasted. Some hadal amphipods have been found with pieces of wood in their guts, wood that fell from land, drifted down through miles of water, and settled on the trench floor. The amphipods eat it, digest it, extract whatever nutrients they can from something that traveled so far from its origin. There are sea cucumbers too in the trenches. They look like they're remade of glass, so transparent you can see their internal organs. They crawl across the sediment, ingesting mud, processing it through their digestive systems, extracting microscopic nutrients. Watching these creatures in their natural habitat via footage from deep sea cameras is like watching life in slow motion. Nothing moves quickly. Nothing seems stressed or hurried. The snailfish drifts. The amphipods crawl. The sea cucumbers plow. Everything happens at the pace the hadal zone demands. Slow, deliberate, energy, efficient. They not fighting the depth. They not struggling to survive. They just living. This is their home. The pressure that would kill us is normal to them. The darkness is comfortable. The cold is all they've ever known. And the floor beneath them is the foundation of that life. Solid rock covered in fine sediment, providing a surface to rest on, to crawl across, to process for food. The floor supports the hadal creatures the same way it supports everything else, quietly, patiently, without complaint. Life at the bottom of the world is still life. Different, strange, adapted beyond recognition, but alive, and the floor welcomes it. Let's talk about pressure in a way that is easier to understand. At sea level, the atmosphere presses down on you with a force of about 15 pounds per square inch. You don't notice it because you are built for it, adapted to it. The air inside your body pushes out with equal force. Everything. Go underwater just 10 feet, and the pressure increases by about 4.5 pounds per square inch. At 3 feet, 1 atmosphere of water pressure. The total pressure is twice what it is at the surface. Your ears feel it. You need to equalize. At 330 feet, you are at 10 atmospheres. At 3,300 feet, 100 atmospheres. The deepest a human has ever dived on scuba is about 1,000 feet, and that required special gas mixtures and years of training. At 36,000 feet, the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the pressure is about 1,100 atmospheres, 16,000 pounds per square inch, 8 tons of force on every square inch of surface. If you could magically transport a person to that depth, protected somehow from the immediate crushing, given time to experience it, what would they feel? Nothing. Actually, because they'd be dead instantly. The pressure would force water into their cells, rupture membranes, collapse their lungs, compress their body to a fraction of its normal size. There is no surviving that pressure, not for humans, not for any land animal, but for creatures born there, adapted there, built for it. The pressure is just normal. Their cells don't have air pockets, no gas, filled spaces to collapse. Their proteins are structured differently, folded in ways that maintain function under extreme pressure. Their membranes are reinforced with special lipids that prevent them from becoming too rigid. To them, the pressure is an embrace, a constant, even force from all directions, holding them, keeping them together, providing the conditions they need to exist. Bring them to the surface, which has happened accidentally when deep sea creatures get caught in research nets. And they die, not from crushing, but from expansion. The decrease in pressure causes their bodies to fail. What we think of as normal is to them deadly. Perspective matters. What kills us is home to them. What comforts us would harm them. There is no universal good pressure, just different adaptations to different conditions, and the ocean floor experiences it all. From the surface, where the only pressure is atmospheric, down to the huddle zone where the weight of the entire ocean presses down. The floor doesn't judge, doesn't prefer one pressure over another. It just exists under whatever pressure is above it, solid and stable, doing its job. In a way, the floor is the ultimate example of acceptance. It doesn't resist the weight. It doesn't wish things were different. It simply bears what it bears, holds what it holds, supports what it supports. Maybe that is a model worth considering, not fighting against the pressures in your life, but accepting them, adapting to them, finding ways to exist comfortably under conditions that might have seemed impossible. The floor knows pressure, like everything else, is just another condition, and every condition can be home to something. At the southern end of the Mariana Trench, there is a small, narrow depression called the Challenger Deep. It is the deepest point in the ocean, 36,070 feet below sea level, or just under 7 miles. Only 4 people have ever been there. 4, in all of human history. The first was Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh in 1960, in a submersible called the Trieste. They spent 20 minutes on the bottom, peering through a small window into the darkness. They saw a flatfish and some shrimp, proof that life existed even there. And then they surfaced, ending the deepest dive in history. No one returned for 50. 2 years then, in 2012, filmmaker James Cameron descended, alone in a specially built submersible. He spent a few hours on the floor, collecting samples, filming, experiencing the deepest place on Earth in solitude. And then, in 2019, Victor Vescovo became the 3rd person to reach the Challenger Deep, followed shortly by 2 more divers. 5 visits total in 60 years. What did they see? Pale sediment. Very fine, very soft, almost fluffy. The floor here accumulates sediment incredibly slowly, maybe a few centimeters per 1,000 years. What is there is the finest clay, the lightest particles, stuff that took weeks or months to fall from the surface. They saw amphipods, small, pale, translucent, snailfish, a few sea cucumbers. No forests of corals, no crowds of fish, but life nonetheless, sparse life, patient life. They saw trash, a plastic bag, candy wrappers, evidence that human waste has reached even the deepest part of the ocean. It is a sobering reminder that nowhere is truly remote anymore, that the floor, patient as it is, now holds our garbage along with everything else. But mostly, they saw stillness. The Challenger Deep is quiet. The water doesn't move much. No currents strong enough to stir the sediment, no turbulence. Just a gentle, almost imperceptible drift. The sediment shows no signs of disturbance, no tracks except where the submersible touched down, no burrows except the slow work of worms and other burrowing creatures. Just flat, pale mud extending in all directions, disappearing into the darkness beyond the submersible. Lights. It is peaceful there, in a way that is hard to describe, the weight of the entire ocean pressing down, and yet the floor calm, undisturbed, patient. The darkness absolute, and yet not frightening, just present, just what it is. The Challenger Deep is the end of descent. There is nowhere deeper to go. You've reached the floor of the floor, the bottom of everything, and what you find there is not drama or terror or emptiness, but just the floor. Doing what it does, existing, holding, waiting. 4 people have stood on the moon. Hundreds have climbed Everest. But only 4 have reached the Challenger Deep. The floor doesn't mind. It doesn't need visitors. It is content to rest in darkness, holding the ocean above it, supporting whatever life finds its way down, accumulating sediment grain by grain, measuring time in geological patience. The deepest place is also, perhaps, the calmest. And that is worth remembering. We think of the ocean floor as silent. It is dark down there, after all, and in darkness we imagine quiet. But the ocean is not silent. It is full of sound, humming, clicking, groaning, singing. Sound that travels far, echoes off the floor, creates a landscape made of vibration. Sound moves differently in water than in air. Faster, about 4 times faster. A sound that would take a second to travel 1,000 feet in air takes only about a quarter second in water, and it travels farther too. In air, sound fades quickly, absorbed by moisture, scattered by wind. But in water, Sound can travel for hundreds or thousands of miles without losing much strength. This means the ocean floor is bathed in sound from sources incredibly distant. A whale singing off the coast of California might be heard by creatures on the ocean floor near Hawaii, thousands of miles away. A ship's propeller grinding in the Arctic might be audible in the Atlantic, the sound traveling along certain paths where temperature and pressure create acoustic channels that trap and guide sound waves. The ocean is a resonant space. Sound bounces off the surface, off the floor, off underwater mountains. It refracts through layers of different temperature and salinity. It creates echoes, harmonics, standing waves, and the floor is part of this. Sound waves hit the sediment, and some of the energy is absorbed, some reflected. The type of floor matters. Soft mud absorbs more sound than hard rock. Sand creates different echoes than clay. The floor's texture, its composition, its hardness, all of these affect how sound behaves. Scientists use this. They map the floor using sonar, sending sound waves down and listening for the echoes. The time it takes for the echo to return tells them the depth. The quality of the echo, whether it is sharp or diffuse, strong or weak, tells them about the floor's composition. Hard volcanic rock gives a strong, clear echo. Soft sediment gives a muffled, weak one. So every ping of sonar is a conversation with the floor. The sound asks, "What are you made of? How far away are you?" And the floor answers, in echoes, in reflections, in the way it absorbs or bounces the sound back. But the floor doesn't just respond to human sounds. It hears everything. The groaning of ice sheets calving into the ocean, the rumble of underwater earthquakes, the crack of rocks breaking under tectonic stress, the hiss of hydrothermal vents, the snap of pistol shrimp, tiny crustaceans that create bubbles that collapse with a sound so loud it stuns prey. All of this reaches the floor. All of it reflects off the sediment, off the rock, creating a sonic environment that is far richer than the darkness would suggest. The floor listens, has been listening for billions of years. It hears the ocean's voice in all its forms, biological, geological, physical. It hears the symphony of the deep, the percussion of falling particles, the bass notes of earthquakes, the high frequencies of dolphin clicks. The floor is not silent. It is part of a soundscape as complex as any forest or city. You just have to listen. Deep in the ocean, there is a layer of water where something strange happens to sound. It is called the SOFAR channel, sound fixing and ranging channel, and it acts like a horizontal fiber optic cable for acoustic waves. Here is how it works. Sound speed in water depends on temperature, pressure, and salinity. Warmer water carries sound faster. Higher pressure also increases sound speed. So, as you descend from the surface, two things happen. Temperature drops, which slows sound, and pressure increases, which speeds sound up. At a certain depth, usually around 3,000 feet, though it varies by location, these effects balance. If a sound is produced in the SOFAR channel, the waves naturally refract back toward it. If they try to go up, they hit warmer water and bend back down. If they try to go down, they hit higher pressure and bend back up. The sound is channeled horizontally, like light in a fiber optic cable, and it can travel for thousands of miles without significant loss. Fin whales and blue whales, the largest animals on Earth, sing in the SOFAR channel. Their low-frequency calls, pitched perfectly to travel in this layer, can cross entire ocean basins. A whale singing off Antarctica might be heard near the equator, thousands of miles away, the sound arriving hours or days later, attenuated, but still recognizable. The floor, miles below the SOFAR channel, receives some of this sound. Not the direct waves, those stay trapped in the channel, but the reflections, the leakage, the vibrations that make it down through the water column. The floor hears the whales distantly, like echoes from another room. During World War II, the U.S. Navy discovered the SOFAR channel and used it for rescue. Pilots who crashed at sea could drop a small bomb set to explode at SOFAR depth, and the sound would travel so far that listening stations thousands of miles away could triangulate the pilot's position. The channel saved lives by carrying sound farther than anyone thought possible. Today, scientists use the SOFAR channel to study ocean warming. Sound speed changes slightly with temperature, so by timing sound signals traveling across ocean basins, they can measure how temperature is changing over time. The ocean itself becomes a thermometer, and the so far channel is the sensing element. But the floor knows the channel not as a scientific tool, but as a layer of the ocean that constantly murmurs, constantly carries signals from distant sources. It is part of the acoustic environment, one more source of sound in the deep. The channel is invisible. You can't see it or touch it. It is defined only by the way sound behaves, only by refraction and wave mechanics. And yet, it is as real as any physical structure, as permanent as the floor itself, a feature of the ocean that has existed for as long as there has been stratified water with temperature and pressure gradients. The so far channel is proof that the ocean has structure beyond the visible, that there are layers and boundaries made not of rock or water, but of physics. Imagine lying on the ocean floor miles deep in absolute darkness. And then, faintly, you hear singing. Not human singing. Not even singing in a way you'd immediately recognize. But a sound nonetheless. A low, mournful moan that rises and falls, changes pitch, creates patterns. It is a humpback whale singing somewhere far above you, and the sound is drifting down through the water column, reaching even this deep place. Whales are the great musicians of the ocean. Humpbacks compose songs that can last 20 minutes, with themes and variations, verses repeated. Each population has its own song, and the songs change over time, evolving, incorporating new elements, discarding old ones. They re cultural artifacts passed from whale to whale, from generation to generation. Blue whales produce the loudest sounds of any animal, calls that can exceed 180 decibels. They re-pitched low, around 10 to 40 hertz below the range of human hearing, but felt as much as heard. These calls travel thousands of miles, crossing ocean basins, possibly allowing whales separated by thousands of miles to communicate. Sperm whales don't sing. They click, rapid series of clicks, sometimes hundreds, per minute, used for echolocation and possibly communication. The clicks are loud, over 200 decibels, and they highly directional, focused by the whale's enormous head into beams of sound that can stun prey. All of this sound rains down onto the ocean floor. The floor receives it, absorbs some, reflects some, and in the process, the floor becomes a recording surface. Not in the sense of magnetic tape, but in a more subtle way. Some scientists believe that the sediment on the ocean floor may actually preserve acoustic information. Vibrations from whale songs might cause tiny particles to settle in patterns, might affect how layers compact, might leave signatures that, theoretically, could be read millions of years later. It is speculative. We don't have the technology to read such records yet, but the possibility is there. More concretely, the floor affects how whale songs propagate. Sound bounces off the floor, creating echoes, multipath propagation, where the same call arrives at a listener from multiple directions, directly through the water and as a reflection off the floor. Whales may use these reflections to navigate, to gauge water depth, to understand the shape of the ocean basin they swimming through. The floor and the whales are in conversation. In a way, the whales sing, the floor listens, responds with echoes, shapes the acoustic environment, and the whales, in turn, adjust their calls based on what comes back, based on what the floor tells them about the world. And someday, billions of years from now, when the ocean is gone and the floor has been lifted into mountains or subducted into the mantle, will there be any trace of the whales? Any record that they sang here, that their voices touched this particular patch of sediment? Maybe, maybe not. But for now, the floor hears them, hears their songs, their calls, their clicks, hears them and holds the memory. However briefly, however imperfectly, the floor listens to the whales, and in its way, remembers. Even when the ocean is calm, even when there are no whales singing or ships passing, even in the quietest moments, the ocean floor is not silent. It hums. The hum is real. Scientists can measure it. It is a very low frequency sound, around 3 to 10 millihertz, far below human hearing. But it is constant, global, always present. The entire ocean floor vibrates slightly, continuously, producing this sound. What causes it? Ocean waves. Not the waves you see breaking on beaches, but the long period waves that roll across the deep ocean. These waves create pressure variations on the seafloor as they pass. And when waves from different storms interact, when two wave systems cross each other, they create standing waves, patterns of pressure that push down on the floor in rhythmic pulses. These pulses are tiny. The floor moves by just nanometers, billionths of a meter. But across the entire ocean, the effect adds up. The floor hums, resonates, vibrates at frequencies determined by the size of the ocean basins, the depth of the water, the patterns of wave activity on the surface. Think of it like a bell. Strike a bell and it rings at specific frequencies, determined by its size and shape. The ocean does something similar. Waves strike it continuously, and it responds by vibrating at its natural frequencies. The hum was discovered only in the 1990s using sensitive seismometers placed on the ocean floor. Before that, scientists had seen the signal on land-based seismometers but couldn't explain it. They called it the Earth's hum and speculated about various causes. Only when they measured it directly on the ocean floor did the explanation become clear. Now we know the ocean is humming. Has been humming for as long as there have been waves and ocean basins. The floor is part of a planetary scale musical instrument, producing notes too low for any ear to hear but detectable by instruments sensitive enough to measure them. The hum varies with the seasons. In winter, when storms are more frequent and waves larger, the hum gets slightly louder. The floor's vibration follows the rhythm of the atmosphere, the cycle of storms and calms. It also varies by location. Different parts of the ocean floor hum at slightly different frequencies, depending on local depth, sediment type, underlying rock structure. The floor is not singing in perfect unison. It is a chorus, each part contributing its own note. And this hum is old, as old as the oceans themselves. 4 billion years of continuous vibration, the floor responding to the waves above it, never stopping, never resting. Always humming in frequencies below the threshold of life. It is a lullaby, in a way the earth singing itself to sleep, over and over, continuously. The floor as the vocal cords, the waves as the breath, the ocean basins as the throat and mouth shaping the sound. And it is still going. Right now, as you rest, the ocean floor is humming, quietly, steadily, eternally. A sound that predates all life, that will continue after life is gone. The earth, its own voice, patient and low and never-ending. Let's catalog everything the ocean floor hears in a single day. First, the hum. Always the hum, the baseline vibration. The floor's own voice resonating at frequencies too low to hear. Then the biological sounds. Whales calling, humpbacks singing their long, complex songs. Blues moaning their deep notes. Fins producing pulses. Rights, greys, sperms, each species with its own acoustic signature. Dolphins clicking and whistling, seals barking near the surface. Fish grunting, drumming, croaking. Yes, fish make sounds. Thousands of species do, using their swim bladders, their teeth, their fins. Shrimp, millions of them snapping their claws, creating tiny bubbles that collapse with sharp pops. In some areas, the collective sound of snapping shrimp is loud enough to interfere with sonar, a background crackle, like static that never stops. Then, the geological sounds. Earthquakes, the floor shifting suddenly, releasing years of accumulated stress in a few seconds of violent shaking. The sound propagates through the rock, through the water, sometimes across entire ocean basins. Underwater landslides, sediment on steep slopes, occasionally breaks loose, tumbles downward, creating low rumbles that can last for minutes or hours. Ice calving. In polar regions, glaciers and ice shelves break off into the ocean, with cracks so loud they register on seismometers thousands of miles away. The floor hears these, feels the vibrations, records them in ways we're only beginning to understand. Volcanoes. Underwater eruptions produce sounds that range from low rumbles to high-pitched hisses depending on the violence of the eruption, the depth of water, the type of lava. The floor beneath an erupting seamount is deafened, overwhelmed with sound. Then, human sounds. Ships. The ocean is full of ships, cargo vessels, tankers, fishing boats, cruise ships, and each one produces a continuous droning sound from its propellers. Naval vessels add sonar pings, Active sonar sends out loud pulses to detect submarines, and these pulses are among the loudest human-made sounds in the ocean. Drilling. Oil rigs, research vessels taking sediment cores, construction in coastal areas. All of these produce percussive sounds that travel far through the water. And warfare. Naval exercises, torpedo tests, the occasional detonation of unexploded ordnance from old wars. These produce sharp, violent sounds that propagate for hundreds of miles. All of this reaches the floor, every sound, every vibration. The floor is the receiver, the audience, the listener to the ocean's entire acoustic environment. And it doesn't filter, it doesn't choose what to hear. It receives everything, the whale songs and the ship engines, the shrimp snaps and the earthquake rumbles, the natural and the human-made, the beautiful and the harsh. In its way, the floor is the most patient listener imaginable. It doesn't judge the sounds, doesn't prefer the whales to the ships. It just receives, absorbs, reflects, participates in the acoustic environment without bias. Maybe that is a lesson worth considering. To listen without judgment. To receive all sounds, all signals, all information, and to hold it gently without needing to categorize it as good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant. And in hearing, it participates in the ocean's life, even from the deepest darkness, even in silence. 300 million years ago, when all the continents were joined into Pangaea, there was only one ocean. Well, technically there were smaller seas between parts of Pangaea, but the vast majority of Earth's water was gathered into a single immense ocean that covered most of the planet. We call it Panthalassa, all sea, and it was the largest ocean Earth has ever had. While Pangaea took up perhaps a third of the planet's surface, Panthalassa covered the rest. Imagine an ocean so wide that if you stood on one shore, the opposite shore would be halfway around the world. The floor of Panthalassa was young. Ocean floor doesn't last forever. It is created at ridges, spreads outward, and eventually gets subducted at trenches. The cycle takes about 200 million years on average, which means all of the Panthallassic floor, every square mile of it, has been recycled, destroyed, pulled into the mantle, and melted back into magma. We know Panthalassa existed only because of the rocks it left on land. When ocean floor gets scraped onto continents at subduction zones, fragments sometimes survive. Bits of basalt, deep sea sediment, chunks of oceanic crust that somehow avoided being melted. Geologists find these fragments in mountain ranges, study them, reconstruct what the ancient ocean must have been like. And from these fragments, we know some things. Panthalassa was warm. Earth had no polar ice caps back then, and ocean temperatures were higher than today. It had its own currents, its own patterns of upwelling and downwelling, its own ecosystems. Life in Panthalassa was strange by modern standards. Trilobites still crawled across the floor. Early fish were evolving. Ammonites, coiled shellfish related to modern nautilus, drifted through the water. The first sharks were appearing. The ocean was rich with life, but life very different from what exists today. And then Pangaea began to break up. The floor started spreading along new rifts. The Atlantic opened. The Indian Ocean formed. Panthalassa shrank, became the Pacific, still large, but no longer all sea. The floor that had once stretched across most of the planet was consumed at subduction zones, making room for new floors in new oceans. Today, nothing of Panthalassa's floor remains. It is gone, completely recycled. Its atoms now part of the mantle, part of new volcanic rock, part of the cycle that continues to this day. But the floor remembers in a sense. The floor that exists now, the Pacific, Atlantic, Indian Ocean floors, is made of the same processes that made Panthalassa, the same spreading, the same subduction, the same slow conveyor belt of crust. Panthalassa was temporary. All ocean floors are temporary. They last a few 100 million years, then get replaced. It is the process that is permanent, not the individual pieces of floor, and that is strangely comforting. Nothing has to last forever to matter. Panthalassa mattered for its time, supported life, shaped the planet, and when its time ended, it gracefully returned to the mantle, making room for what came next. The floor is always changing, always temporary, and that is okay. Between Pangaea's breakup and today, there was another ocean smaller than Panthalassa, but important enough that it shaped continents, shaped climates, shaped the evolution of life. The Tethys Sea lay between the northern and southern parts of Pangaea as they drifted apart. It was a tropical ocean, warm and shallow in places, dotted with islands and coral reefs. For hundreds of millions of years, it separated what would become Europe and Asia from Africa and India. The floor of the Tethys accumulated thick layers of sediment limestone from coral reefs, shells from countless marine organisms, muds and clays washed in from the surrounding continents. These sediments compressed into rock, layer upon layer, building a record of ancient tropical seas. And then the continents moved. Africa drifted north. India, which had broken away from Antarctica and was traveling north like a ship across the ocean, crashed into Asia. The Tethys Sea was caught between converging landmasses. Its floor buckled, crumpled, was pushed upward by the tremendous forces of continental collision, and what had been ocean floor, sediment laid down in warm, shallow seas became mountains, the Himalayas, the Alps, the Zagros Mountains of Iran. All of them contain rocks that were once Tethys seafloor. Marine fossils, shells, corals, ancient sea creatures can be found on mountain peaks 2 miles above sea level. Everest itself contains limestone full of marine fossils. The summit of the highest mountain on Earth is made of ocean floor. Stand there, and you're standing on what was once the bottom of a tropical sea, now lifted higher than anywhere else on the planet. It is one of the most dramatic transformations imaginable. The floor of an ocean becoming the roof of the world. Rock that was submerged, that hosted coral reefs and schools of fish, now frozen, barren, exposed to the jet stream. Small remnants of the Tethys still exist. The Mediterranean Sea, the Caspian Sea, parts of the Persian Gulf. They're like puddles left after a lake drains, isolated fragments of what was once a continuous ocean. But most of the Tethys is gone. Its floor is either uplifted into mountains or subducted and melted. The ocean itself closed when the continents collided. The water, of course, didn't disappear. It joined the other oceans, mixed with the global ocean that surrounds all continents today. The Tethys shows us that oceans can die. They're born when continents rift apart. They grow as new floor is created. And they die when the continents collide again, when the floor is either consumed by subduction or pushed up into mountains. Nothing is permanent. Not oceans. Not ocean floors. They exist for a while, a long while by human standards, but a brief while in geological time, and then they're transformed into something else. The floor that is now the Himalayas once lay at the bottom of a warm sea, accumulating sediment, supporting life. Now it is rock and ice and thin air, and millions of years from now, it will be something else again, eroded, subducted, recycled. The floor changes, always. And every change is a story worth knowing. Earth hasn't always been the way it is now. The climate has swung between extremes that would be hard to imagine if we didn't have the evidence. Evidence preserved, as always, in ocean floor sediment. There have been times when the poles were warm, not just ice-free but genuinely warm. Temperate forests growing in Antarctica, palm trees in the Arctic, crocodiles swimming in polar seas. These are called greenhouse periods, and they lasted for millions of years. During these times, the ocean was different, warmer overall, with less difference in temperature between equator and poles. The currents flowed differently. There was no cold, dense polar water sinking and driving the deep circulation. Instead, warm, salty water sank in the subtropics, creating a sluggish, stratified ocean. The floor from these greenhouse periods, where it still exists, not yet subducted, shows sediments rich in organic matter. The warm ocean had blooms of plankton near the surface, and when these organisms died, they sank in such abundance that the floor became covered in carbon, rich muds. In some areas, these muds became source rocks for oil and gas. The energy we use today came from ancient greenhouse oceans. And then there were icehouse periods when ice covered the poles and extended down toward the equator. Not just the ice ages we know from the recent past, but older, more severe ones. About 700 million years ago, Earth may have experienced what is called snowball Earth, a time when ice covered the entire planet, pole to pole, equator included. The ocean froze over, possibly several times. Life survived somehow, in refuges, maybe under the ice, maybe around volcanic vents, maybe in patches of open water, that persisted despite the cold. The ocean floor from snowball Earth times is mostly gone, subducted, recycled, but fragments remain and they show strange deposits. Rocks formed from glacial debris found at what were then tropical latitudes. Ice at the equator. It is hard to imagine, but the evidence is there. These swings between hothouse and icehouse are driven by many factors. The arrangement of continents. When they cluster near the equator, the climate tends to warm. When they re-near the poles, ice can grow. The chemistry of the atmosphere. More carbon dioxide means warmer, less means colder. The sun's brightness, which has slowly increased over Earth's history. But through all these changes, the floor has been there, recording, accumulating sediment that reflects warm oceans and cold oceans, ice and fire, blooms and extinctions. The floor does judge these changes. It does mourn the lost warmth or fear the returning ice. It just records them, layer by layer, preserving the evidence for anyone who wants to understand Earth's long climate story. And that story says, change is normal. Extremes are normal. The current climate, with ice at the poles and warmth at the equator, is just one state among many that Earth has experienced. The floor has seen it all, warm poles and frozen tropics and everything in between. And it will see future changes too, whatever they may be, recording them with the same patient neutrality it is always shown. 5 times in the past 500 million years, life on Earth has nearly ended, not from asteroids alone. Only one of the big 5 mass extinctions was caused by an impact. The others were slower, stranger, more complex, and the ocean floor remembers all of them. The Permian extinction 252 million years ago was the worst. Perhaps 95% of marine species died. The ocean floor from that time shows a sudden change in sediment. Fewer shells, less diversity, layers of rock that suggest the ocean became acidic, possibly anoxic, possibly toxic, with hydrogen sulfide. What caused it? Maybe massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia releasing so much carbon dioxide that the ocean warmed and acidified. Maybe methane released from the ocean floor itself, creating a runaway greenhouse effect. We're not sure, but the floor records the result. A world of death, layers of mud with almost no life in them. And then slowly, life returned. New species evolved. The floor started accumulating more diverse sediments again. Shells reappeared. Reefs began to grow. The ocean recovered, though it took millions of years. The Cretaceous extinction, 66 million years ago, killed the dinosaurs. But it killed a lot of marine life too. The floor from that time shows a thin layer of clay rich in iridium, the signature of the asteroid impact. Below the clay, abundant life. Above it, much less. Many species of plankton went extinct. The ecosystems that depended on them collapsed. But again, life recovered. Within a few million years, new species filled the empty niches. The floor accumulated new types of sediment as new ecosystems evolved. What is striking about the floor's record of extinctions is how clearly it shows both the dying and the recovery. The extinctions are sudden, geologically speaking, but the recovery is slow. Layers and layers of sediment with low diversity, gradually increasing as evolution fills in the gaps. It is a reminder that ecosystems are resilient, but not indestructible. They can collapse, they can be pushed to the brink, but given time, millions of years, they can rebuild. The floor doesn't editorialize about this. It doesn't say, extinctions are bad, or recovery is good. It just shows what happened. This composition of sediment before, this composition after, there is a kind of cold comfort in that. Extinctions are real, they happen. Species die, sometimes lots of them, all at once. But the planet continues. Life continues. The floor continues accumulating sediment, recording the new normal, whatever that turns out to be. We're reliving through what some scientists call the 6th extinction. Species dying at rates much faster than normal, mostly due to human activity. The floor is recording this too, in sediments being laid down right now. Future geologists, if there are any, will see a change in the layers. Fewer shells, different compositions. The AL recognize it as an extinction event, but they'll also see what comes after, because there will be an after. There always is. The floor knows this from experience. The ocean floor is the planet's most complete diary. Unlike land, where erosion constantly removes evidence, where ice sheets scrape bedrock bare, where rivers cut valleys and wind scours deserts, the deep ocean floor is gentle with its archives. What settles stays settled. What falls is preserved. The floor doesn't edit, doesn't revise, doesn't remove pages from the book. Yes, eventually the floor itself is subducted and the record is destroyed. But that takes hundreds of millions of years. Until then, the sediment accumulates undisturbed, layer upon layer, a complete record of everything happening in the ocean, and often on land too. The floor remembers ice ages, remembers warm periods, remembers volcanic eruptions, each one preserved as a thin ash layer, remembers asteroid impacts, remembers the evolution of species, watching as new types of shells appear, old types disappear, the composition of sediment changing to reflect the changing life above. It remembers ocean chemistry. Was the water acidic or basic? The minerals in the sediment tell us. Was it rich in oxygen or poor? The types of organisms preserved or the lack of organisms give us clues. It remembers currents. Strong currents deposit coarse sediment, sand, pebbles. Weak currents allow only fine clay to settle. By mapping sediment types, we can reconstruct how water moved across the floor millions of years ago. It remembers continents. Pollen grains washed into the ocean and preserved in sediment tell us what plants grew on nearby land. Dust from deserts, ash from volcanoes, sediment from rivers, all of these come from continents and tell stories about what was happening there. The floor remembers everything because it has no mechanism for forgetting. It can only add layers, never subtract them. It is the ultimate archive biased toward preservation, complete by default, comprehensive without trying to be. And what is remarkable is how readable this archive is. Yes, you need expertise to interpret it. You need to know forearm species, isotope chemistry, sediment analysis. But the information is there, waiting. The floor isn't hiding anything. It has written everything down in the clearest handwriting. It knows layers of sediment, each one distinct, each one representing a moment in time. You could spend a lifetime studying a single core and never exhaust its stories, because each layer connects to larger questions. This ash layer, which eruption was it? Which continent did it come from? How did it affect the ocean, the climate, the life? These shells, which species are they? Why were these species living here at this time? What does that tell us about water temperature, chemistry, the state of the global ocean? The floor is patient with our questions. It doesn't rush us, doesn't demand we figure it out quickly. It has been holding these answers for millions of years. It can wait a little longer while we learn to read them. The ocean floor's memory is long, precise, and generous. It offers its knowledge freely to anyone willing to listen, to dig, to study. Right now, as you rest, the Atlantic Ocean is growing, widening, pushing the Americas farther from Europe and Africa. The rate is slow, about an inch per year, roughly the speed your fingernails grow. In your lifetime, the Atlantic will widen by perhaps 6 feet. In a century, by 8 feet. Not much, barely noticeable. But time is long. Time doesn't hurry. And over millions of years, those inches add up. In 50 million years, the Atlantic will be several hundred miles wider than it is now. North America will have drifted farther west. South America will have moved farther from Africa. The mid-Atlantic ridge will still be there, still spreading new floor, still pushing the continents apart. The floor being born today along that ridge will, by then, be old floor hundreds of miles from the ridge, covered in thick sediment, possibly starting its journey toward a subduction zone at the edge of the Atlantic. Because oceans can only grow so much before they start to close again. The Pacific is shrinking, its floor being consumed at subduction zones around the Ring of Fire faster than new floor is created at Pacific ridges. Eventually, the Pacific will close entirely. The Americas will collide with Asia, and the Atlantic, grown wide, will start to shrink as new subduction zones open along its margins. It is a cycle. Oceans open, oceans grow, oceans shrink, oceans close. The cycle takes a few 100 million years, but it repeats. The floor is part of this cycle, temporary by design, existing for a while and then being recycled. But for now, the Atlantic is young and growing. The floor along the mid-Atlantic ridge is fresh black basalt, newly cooled, barely covered in sediment. Travel west or east from the ridge and the floor gets progressively older, more covered, more distant from its birth. And life follows this pattern too. Vent ecosystems near the ridge, where the floor is youngest. Further out, different communities adapted to older floor, to thicker sediment, to different chemical conditions. The growing Atlantic is creating habitat. Every inch of new floor is new real estate for organisms, new surface for sediment to accumulate on, new space for the ocean's slow processes to play out. And the continents, slowly drifting apart, are oblivious. They don't feel the motion, don't notice they're moving. They just ride the conveyor belt of the floor, passive passengers on a journey they didn't choose and can't control. 50 million years from now, if someone looks at a map, the Atlantic will be wider, the continents rearranged, the floor expanded, and the process will still be ongoing, the ridge still spreading, the floor still growing, the cycle continuing. The future floor is being born now, right now. This moment, magma rising, lava cooling, new basalt forming. And it will be there, in some form, for hundreds of millions of years, participating in whatever oceans exist, then supporting whatever life evolves, recording whatever happens in its patient, permanent way. The Atlantic grows, the floor spreads. Time continues. While the Atlantic expands, the Pacific is doing the opposite. It is shrinking, closing, disappearing into subduction zones that ring its edges like a tightening noose. The ring of fire, the belt of volcanoes and earthquake zones that circles the Pacific marks where ocean floor is being consumed. Japan sits on one subduction zone, Indonesia on another, the west coast of South America on a third. The Aleutians, the Philippines, New Zealand, all of them places where Pacific floor is sliding beneath continents or other oceanic plates, diving back into the mantle. The rate varies by location, but on average, the Pacific is shrinking by a few inches per year. Not much, but enough that, over millions of years, the ocean is noticeably smaller. Go back 100 million years and the Pacific was much larger, covering perhaps half the planet. Today, it is still the largest ocean, but smaller than it was. And the trend continues. The Pacific floor itself is moving. The eastern edge, near the Americas, is being consumed. The western edge, near Asia, is also being consumed. The floor in the middle is being pushed toward the edges like a sheet of paper being crumpled from opposite sides. And eventually, maybe 100 million years from now, maybe more, the Pacific will close entirely. The Americas will collide with Asia. Australia will have already collided with Asia. By then, the Pacific floor will be completely subducted, gone, melted back into the mantle. What will remain? Fragments, perhaps, scraped onto continents. Slivers of basalt and sediment that somehow avoided subduction, that ended up pushed onto land instead of pulled under. Future geologists will find these fragments and reconstruct what the Pacific was like, just as current geologists study fragments of ancient oceans. But the vast majority of the Pacific floor, the millions of square miles of basalt, the thick layers of sediment, the record of hundreds of millions of years, will be destroyed, recycled, transformed back into magma, and eventually erupted as new volcanic rock somewhere else. It is the natural end of ocean floor. It doesn't last forever. Can't. The planet recycles its crust, and ocean floor is part of that cycle. But there is something poignant about it too. The floor that exists now in the Pacific, the floor hosting deep-sea vents, supporting Hadal trenches, accumulating sediment, will be gone someday. Completely. As if it never existed. Except it did exist. Does exist, and while it exists, it matters. It supports life. It records history. It participates in the planet's processes. The fact that it is temporary doesn't make it meaningless. Nothing lasts forever. Not oceans, not continents, not mountain ranges or rivers or ice sheets. Everything the Earth builds, it eventually disassembles and builds again in a different form. The Pacific floor knows this. It is being consumed right now, at its edges. It just slides beneath the continents, bends downward, accepts its fate. In 100 million years, the Pacific will be a memory. But new oceans will have opened. New floors will have formed. The cycle continues. The Pacific shrinks. The floor returns. Time continues. Continents drift. They move apart. And eventually, they come back together. It has happened before. Pangaea was the first supercontinent. Before it, there was Rodinia, assembled about 1 billion years ago. Before that, other supercontinents, whose names we are less sure of. The cycle of continents gathering and dispersing has been running for billions of years, and it will happen again. Scientists have given names to future supercontinents: Pangaea, Proxima, Nova Pangaea, Orica, Amasia. Each name represents a different model of how the continents might come together over the next 200–300 million years. The details differ between models, but the basic pattern is similar. The Atlantic eventually stops spreading and starts closing. The Pacific continues shrinking. The Americas drift toward Asia. Africa rotates. Antarctica moves north, and slowly, over tens of millions of years, the continents gather together again into a single landmass. What will the ocean floor look like then? Very different from now. The current Atlantic floor will mostly be gone, subducted as the Atlantic closes. The current Pacific floor will be completely gone. In their place, new ocean floors will have formed in new basins. Maybe an ocean between what is now the Arctic and Asia. Maybe a new ocean splitting Africa and Europe apart in different places. The mid-ocean ridges will be in new locations. The trenches will be different. The patterns of seafloor spreading and subduction will have rearranged completely, but the processes will be the same. Magma rising at ridges, lava cooling into new floor, floor spreading outward, old floor being consumed at subduction zones. The machinery of plate tectonics will keep running, just producing different geographies, and life will adapt. Whatever organisms exist then, evolved from current species, shaped by millions of years of selection, will live on these new floors, in these new oceans. They might be unrecognizable to us, but they'll be doing the same things, eating, reproducing, dying, falling to the floor, becoming part of the sediment. The floor will record all of it. As always, new sediment layers accumulating, preserving the strange life of the distant future, holding evidence of what the ocean was like in an era we can barely imagine. And then, eventually, the next Pangaea will break apart again. The cycle will continue. Continents together, continents apart, together, apart, in a rhythm measured in hundreds of millions of years. The floor is part of this cycle. It doesn't resist it or question it. It just participates, doing its job, supporting life, recording history, spreading and subducting, according to the forces that drive it. In a way, the floor is the most adaptable thing on Earth. It exists in whatever form the tectonic forces create. It doesn't cling to its current configuration. It doesn't fear change. It just is what it is, where it is, for as long as it is there. And then it transforms and is something else. Future Pangaea, future oceans. They already in motion, already being created, piece by piece, as current floors are consumed and new ones are born. The cycle continues. Always. Sea level is not constant. It rises and falls over geological time, and the ocean floor adjusts. Right now, sea level is relatively high compared to ice age conditions, but relatively low compared to greenhouse periods in Earth's past. The ice sheets on Greenland and Antarctica hold enough water that if they melted completely, sea level would rise about 200 feet, enough to flood every coastal city, enough to drown the continental shelves, the shallow platforms around continents where the floor slopes gently before dropping into the deep ocean, enough to create new coastlines hundreds of miles inland from where they are now, and the ocean floor would respond to this. More area covered by water, more space for sediment to accumulate. The continental shelves, currently dry in some places and shallow in others, would become deep water environments. The floor would adapt, but sea level could also fall. If the climate cooled again, if ice sheets grew on continents, water would be locked up as ice and sea level would drop. The last time this happened, during the most recent ice age about 20,000 years ago, sea level was 400 feet lower than now. At that level, the continental shelves were exposed. What is now ocean floor was dry land. Rivers flowed across the shelves and dropped their sediment directly into deep water. The floor that is now covered by hundreds of feet of water was exposed to air, to weather, to erosion. And then the ice melted. Sea level rose and the floor was re-submerged, covered again by water that brought new sediment, new life, new processes. The floor doesn't mind these changes, water above it or air above it. The floor just exists in whatever conditions prevail. It accumulates sediment either way, though the type and rate of accumulation change depending on whether it is submerged or exposed. Looking ahead, sea level will probably rise in the near future as ice sheets melt due to warming climate. The floor will accommodate this. More coastal areas will flood, and the floor will spread its sediment accumulation processes over a wider area. But eventually, thousands or millions of years from now, sea level will fall again. The planet will cool, ice will grow, and the floor will adjust again, adapting to whatever new conditions emerge. The floor is patient with sea level. It has been through this cycle many times. It knows that what is underwater now might be dry land in the future, and what is dry land now might be deep ocean later. Nothing is permanent. Coastlines shift, seas advance and retreat. The floor participates in all of it, neither resisting nor rushing, just responding to the forces that shape it. And through it all, the floor continues doing what it does best, existing, holding, recording, providing a surface for whatever happens. Whether that is sediment falling through water or dust blowing across dry land, the future floor will be shaped by seas that rise and fall, but it will still be the floor, patient and present, doing its quiet work, regardless of how much water rests above it. Someday, millions of years from now, geologists, if there are geologists, will study ocean sediment from the late 20th and early 21st centuries, and they'll see something strange, a layer of unusual composition, rich in plastics, long, chain polymers that don't occur naturally. Microplastics mixed throughout the sediment, tiny fragments that will take thousands of years to break down, maybe longer. They'll see evidence of concrete, huge quantities of it, more than in any previous time in Earth's history. Concrete debris, concrete dust, concrete particles washing into the ocean from coastal construction, from eroding structures. They'll see unusual isotopes, radiation signatures from nuclear weapons tests, from nuclear accidents, carbon isotopes that show sudden shifts due to fossil fuel burning. The chemistry of the sediment will mark our presence clearly. They'll see metals in unusual combinations, aluminum in forms that suggest industrial refining, rare earth elements concentrated in ways that don't happen naturally. The floor is collecting our technological debris, preserving evidence of an industrial civilization, and they'll see changes in the biological component of the sediment. Fewer species of forams in recent layers, changes in plankton communities, evidence of ocean acidification, warming, changes in chemistry that correlate with human activity. We'll are thin, relatively speaking, just a few feet of sediment representing a few centuries of intense human activity, but distinct, unmistakable. Future scientists might call it the Anthropocene layer, or maybe something else. But they'll recognize it as marking a time when one species dominated the planet, changed its chemistry, spread its materials across the entire surface. And then, if we gone by then, if we've gone extinct or evolved into something different, they'll see the layers above our time. They'll see how the ocean recovered, how sediment composition changed back to something more natural, how life adapted to whatever new conditions we created. The floor will hold all of this without judgment. It won't label our layer as good or bad. It will just preserve it, along with everything else. The asteroid impacts, the volcanic eruptions, the ice ages, the warm periods. We're part of Earth's history, and like everything else, our time is being written into the floor's archive. Microplastics and concrete, radiation and metals, all mixed with the usual shells and organic matter and clay. Millions of years from now, our layer will be buried deep under new sediment. It might even be subducted, melted, recycled. But for a while, a long while by human standards, it will be there. Readable. That we changed things. That we left a mark on the planet. The floor is writing our story right now. Collecting our debris, our pollution, our technological signature. It is recording us the same way it is recorded everything else. Patiently, comprehensively, without bias. We're part of the archive. A strange layer in the mud. A moment in deep time the floor will remember us, at least for a while, and then it will move on to recording whatever comes next. The 23rd of January 1960. The bathyscaphe Trieste sits on the surface of the ocean above the Challenger Deep. Inside, two men, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh. They are about to descend deeper than any human has ever gone. The Trieste is essentially a steel ball attached to a large float filled with gasoline, which is lighter than water and doesn't decompress. Ballast tanks hold iron shot. Release the shot, and the craft rises. Keep the shot, and it sinks. Piccard and Walsh release some ballast. The Trieste begins to descend. The journey down takes nearly 5 hours. 5 hours of slowly sinking through the water column, through the sunlit zone, through the twilight zone, into absolute darkness. They descend through layers of water that get colder, denser, more oppressive. At 30,000 feet, they hear a loud crack, something breaking. They debate surfacing but decide to continue. Later they'll discover it was just an exterior window, not the pressure sphere itself, not anything critical, but in the moment, in the darkness, miles from the surface, that sound must have been terrifying. They keep descending. Finally, after nearly 5 hours, they touch bottom, the Challenger Deep. 35,797 feet, almost 7 miles deep. The pressure outside is crushing. But inside the steel sphere, it is normal. The sphere holds. They resafe. Piccard and Walsh peer through the small window. They see pale sediment, soft, fine mud, and then movement. A fish. A flatfish, something like a sole swimming along the bottom. They've found life. At the deepest point in the ocean, where no one expected life to exist, there is a fish, just swimming, as if it is the most normal thing in the world. They spend 20 minutes on the bottom, take notes, make observations, and then they drop ballast and begin the 3-hour ascent back to the surface. Humans have been to the deepest part of the ocean, and then nothing. For 52 years, no one returns. Not because it is impossible. The Trieste proved it could be done. But because it is expensive, difficult, and there is not much funding for deep sea exploration. But Piccard and Walsh's dive proved something important. The ocean floor, even at its deepest, is not a lifeless void. It is home, it supports life, and it is waiting, patiently, for humans to return and explore it more thoroughly. The floor didn't notice the Trieste landing on it. Of course, didn't care that 2 humans had traveled so far to see it. The floor just continued doing what it always does, accumulating sediment, supporting the organisms that live on it, participating in the slow cycles of the deep ocean. But for humans, the dive was revolutionary. It showed that the deepest ocean was accessible, that we could reach the floor even in its most extreme locations, that the boundaries of Earth were not beyond our ability to explore. The floor had been touched by human hands. Well, by a human-made craft. And it would wait patiently for the next visitors, whenever they might arrive. While the Trieste could reach the deepest depths, it was expensive and cumbersome, more of a stunt than a practical research tool. What scientists needed was a smaller, more maneuverable submersible that could work at moderate depths, a mile or 2 down, where most of the interesting geology and biology actually occurs. In 1964, Alvin was born. Alvin is a deep-sea submersible operated by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. It carries 3 people, a pilot and 2 scientists, and can dive to about 14,800 feet. It has manipulator arms for collecting samples, cameras for documentation, and a suite of instruments for measuring ocean conditions. And over the past 60 years, Alvin has transformed our understanding of the ocean floor. It was Alvin that discovered hydrothermal vents in 1977. Scientists knew the vents existed theoretically. Heat flow measurements suggested they should, but no one had seen one until Alvin descended to the Galapagos Rift and found black smokers, tube worms, and an entire ecosystem living on chemistry rather than sunlight. Alvin has explored submarine canyons, underwater volcanoes, trenches, fracture zones. It has collected rock samples from the floor, sediment cores, specimens of deep sea life. It has mapped geological features, studied ocean currents, investigated earthquake zones, and it is not alone. Other countries have built their own submersibles. Japan has Shinkai 6500, which can reach about 21,300 feet. China has Fendoge, which can reach the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Russia, France, and other nations have their own deep sea vehicles, And then there are the ROVs, remotely operated vehicles. These are unmanned, controlled from ships on the surface via long tethers that carry power and data. ROVs can stay down longer than crewed submersibles, can take more risks, can go places that would be too dangerous for humans. And the ORVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, these are free, swimming robots, programmed to follow specific paths, collect data, map the floor, and return to the surface or to a docking station. They re-exploring areas of the ocean floor that have never been seen by human eyes or touched by human hands. Together, these vehicles are revealing the floor in ever greater detail. Every dive brings back new images, new samples, new data. Every expedition discovers new species, new geological features, new processes. But here is what is remarkable. We've barely scratched the surface. Most of the ocean floor has never been visited by a submersible. Most seamounts have never been seen except as sonar blips. Most trenches remain unexplored. The floor is vast, and our tools are few. We like explorers with a handful of flashlights, trying to map a continent at night. We can illuminate small patches, and those patches are fascinating, but the vast majority remains dark, unknown. The floor doesn't mind, it is patient. It will wait as long as it takes for us to explore it thoroughly, if we ever do. And in the meantime, it continues its slow work, spreading, subducting, accumulating sediment, hosting life. Whether we re-watching or not, here is a surprising fact. We have better maps of Mars than we do of the ocean floor. Mars has been mapped at resolutions of a few meters, detailed enough to see individual boulders, the ocean floor. Most of it is mapped at resolutions of a mile or more. Huge areas are completely unknown, except as estimates, based on gravity measurements. Why? Because mapping the ocean floor is hard. On land or on planets without atmospheres, you can map from orbit using cameras or radar, but water absorbs electromagnetic radiation. Cameras don't work through miles of water. Radar doesn't penetrate. You can see the floor from above. Instead, we use sound, sonar, sound navigation and ranging. A ship sends out sound waves, listens for the echoes bouncing off the floor, and calculates depth based on how long the echo takes to return. Modern multi-beam sonar has improved this dramatically. Instead of sending a single sound pulse straight down, it sends out a fan of beams covering a wide area. The result is a swath of depth measurements, building up a map as the ship moves. But it is slow. A ship traveling at 10 knots with a good multi-beam sonar system can map a strip of floor, maybe 5 miles wide. To map the entire ocean floor, about 140 million square miles would take hundreds of ship years. And ships are expensive: fuel, crew, maintenance. A research vessel costs tens of thousands of dollars per Dalton Y to operate. So most of the ocean floor remains unmapped at high resolution. What we have instead are gravity maps. Satellites measure tiny variations in the ocean surface caused by the gravitational pull of underwater features. A seamount pulls water toward it, creating a slight bulge on the surface. A trench does the opposite, creating a slight depression. These gravity maps give us a rough idea of what the floor looks like, where the mountains are, where the trenches are, where the ridges run, but they are not detailed. A seamount that is a mile wide might show up, but anything smaller is invisible. There is a project called Seabed 2030 that aims to map the entire ocean floor at high resolution by the year 2030. They're remaking progress, soliciting data from ships that are already at sea, coordinating international efforts, developing better sonar technology. But even if they succeed, there will still be vast areas we've never seen with cameras, never touched with submersibles, never studied in detail. The floor is simply too large, too deep, too difficult to access. And maybe that is okay. Maybe it is good that some places remain unexplored. The floor has spent billions of years in darkness, undisturbed by human eyes, and it is doing fine. It doesn't need to be mapped to function, doesn't need to be studied to exist. But for those of us who wonder what is down there, the unmapped floor is an invitation. An entire world, larger than all the continents combined, waiting in darkness, holding secrets, supporting life we never imagined. The floor is mostly unknown, and that makes it, in a way, the last great frontier on Earth. Behind every submersible dive, every sonar map, every sediment core, there are scientists. Oceanographers, marine biologists, geologists. People who have dedicated their lives to understanding the ocean floor. They're not adventurers, mostly. They're patient researchers who spend years analyzing data, writing papers, attending conferences, slowly building up humanity's knowledge of the deep ocean. An oceanographer might spend 6 months preparing for a research cruise, writing proposals, securing funding, coordinating with ship operators, planning which sites to visit. Then they spend a few weeks at sea, working 12-hour days, collecting samples, taking measurements, troubleshooting equipment that fails in the salt and pressure. And then they spend years analyzing what they collected. A single sediment core can yield dozens of papers as different researchers extract different types of information from it. A marine biologist might spend a career studying a single species, a deep-sea fish, a tube worm, a hadal, amphipod. They learn its anatomy, its behavior, its genetics, its ecology. They piece together how it lives, what it eats, how it reproduces, how it is adapted to the extreme conditions. A geologist might focus on a single mid-ocean ridge, visiting it repeatedly over decades, mapping its structure, sampling its rocks, measuring its heat flow, building a detailed picture of how that particular piece of floor is being created. These scientists are translators. The floor speaks in sediment layers, in rock compositions, in the distribution of species. And the scientists translate that into language we can understand. Papers, maps, models, explanations. They're also storytellers. The floor has stories, and the scientists help tell them. Stories about ancient climates, about mass extinctions, about the evolution of life, about the movements of continents. The floor holds these stories in its mud and rock, and the scientists extract them, interpret them, share them. It is slow work. You can't rush science. You can't force the ocean floor to give up its secrets faster than it wants to. You have to be patient as the floor itself, collecting data carefully, analyzing it rigorously, building knowledge piece by piece. And most of this work happens in obscurity. No cameras, no headlines. Just scientists in labs and offices, staring at sediment samples under microscopes, running statistical analyses, writing papers that maybe 100 people will read. But it matters. Every forum counted, every isotope measured, every rock sample analyzed adds to our understanding. And cumulatively, over decades, the picture becomes clearer. The scientists who study the ocean floor are doing what the floor itself does: patient accumulation. They accumulate data the way the floor accumulates sediment. Slowly, carefully, layer upon layer, building an archive of knowledge that future scientists can build upon. They're listening to the floor, learning its language, translating its stories, and in doing so they're helping the rest of us understand the quiet, dark, patient world that lies beneath the waves, the world that has been there all along, waiting to be known. You don't need a submersible to explore the ocean floor. You don't need a PhD or access to research vessels or expensive sonar equipment. You're exploring it right now, with your imagination, with your curiosity. By listening to this story, you're visiting places most people never think about. The trenches, the ridges, the seamounts, the deep sediment plains. Exploration isn't just physical travel. It is also mental travel. It is learning, wondering, asking questions, imagining what it would be like to drift down through miles of water, to touch the floor with your own hands, to see bioluminescent creatures glowing in the darkness. And in a way, imaginary exploration is more accessible than the real thing. Anyone can close their eyes and picture the ocean floor. Anyone can wonder what it is like down there. Anyone can let their mind wander across abyssal plains, up seamount slopes, into trench depths. The floor welcomes all explorers, real and imaginary. It doesn't care whether you visit in a submersible or in your thoughts. It exists either way, doing its work, holding its secrets, waiting patiently. And there is value in this kind of exploration. When you learn about the ocean floor, when you think about it, when you wonder about it, you're expanding your sense of what the Earth is. You're recognizing that the world extends beyond the dry land you walk on, beyond the ocean surface you might swim in, down into depths you'll never physically experience. That recognition changes things. It makes the Earth feel bigger, stranger, more complex. It reminds you that there are places utterly unlike anywhere you've been, processes happening far beyond your perception, life forms adapted to conditions you can't imagine. And it reminds you that mystery is okay, that not knowing is okay. The ocean floor is mostly unknown, and that is fine. It makes the world more interesting, not less. You're an explorer because you're curious, because you wonder, because you're willing to spend time thinking about a place you'll never see, learning about processes you'll never witness, appreciating beauty that exists in absolute darkness where no human eye has ever been. The floor has been explored by a handful of submersibles, by networks of sonar-equipped ships, by thousands of scientists, over decades of research. But it has also been explored by millions of people who've read about it, thought about it, let their imaginations dive down into the deep. And every act of curiosity, every moment of wonder is a kind of exploration. You're reaching out to the floor with your mind, even if your body stays safely on land. You're connecting with it, learning from it, participating in the slow expansion of human understanding. The floor doesn't need your attention, but you might need the floor as a reminder of mystery, of patience, of the vastness of the world, as a place to let your thoughts rest, to imagine something beyond your daily concerns, to feel small in the best way. You're an explorer, right now, as you drift towards sleep. Thinking about the ocean floor, you're exploring, and the floor, in its quiet way, welcomes you. We've traveled together through the history of the ocean floor, from its birth in fire and rain, through its slow spreading and eventual subduction. We've met the creatures that live on it, the processes that shape it, the sediment that records it. And if there is one lesson the floor teaches, it is this: nothing happens quickly here. A grain of sand takes months to fall from the surface to the floor. Sediment accumulates at millimeters per 1,000 years. Tectonic plates move at the speed of fingernail growth. Seamounts take millions of years to form. Species evolve over timescales so long that they make human civilizations look like brief flickers. The floor exists in deep time, the kind of time where 1,000,000 years is a relatively short period, where change is measured in tens of millions of years, where patience isn't a virtue, it is the only mode of existence. And there is something deeply soothing about that. In a world that feels like it is speeding up, where everything demands your attention right now, where you're expected to respond immediately, decide quickly, act fast, the ocean floor offers a different model. It suggests that the important things can happen slowly, that accumulation matters, that patient work done over long periods creates something lasting and real. Each flake of marine snow is tiny, almost nothing, but billions of them falling over thousands of years create layers, and those layers become rock, and that rock preserves history for hundreds of millions of years. Your own life works that way too. Each day is small, each action feels insignificant, but day after day, year after year, those small moments accumulate. They build layers. They create who you are. They leave traces that persist. The floor doesn't rush, doesn't panic, doesn't worry about whether it is accumulating sediment fast enough. It just does its work at the pace the work demands, trusting that over time, the layers will build. Maybe that is a model worth adopting, to trust the slow accumulation, to believe that patient work matters even when the results aren't immediately visible, to accept that some things simply take time, and that is okay. The floor has been doing its work for 4 billion years. It will keep doing it for billions more. It doesn't get bored, doesn't get impatient, doesn't wish things would move faster. It just exists in the moment, doing what needs to be done, at the pace that feels right for the work. And as you lie here, breathing slowly, feeling your body relax, you're participating in something similar. You're slowing down, letting go of the urgency, allowing time to stretch and soften. Nothing happens quickly here, in this moment between waking and sleep. And that is not a problem. That is exactly what you need. The floor understands. It has been here before. It will be here after. And right now, it is holding you gently in the slowness, in the patience, in the peace of deep time. The ocean floor has never seen light. For billions of years, it has existed in absolute darkness. And it is fine. Darkness isn't emptiness. It is not void. It is not scary when it is all you've ever known. For the floor, for the creatures that live on it, darkness is normal, comfortable, home. They don't miss the light because they never had it. They don't need it. They've evolved ways of existing that don't depend on seeing, that work perfectly well in the dark. Bioluminescence creates light where needed, small, controlled, just enough to serve a purpose. But most of the time, in most places, the floor rests in complete blackness. And that is where it is most itself. There is something deeply peaceful about that. About existing without the need for light, without the pressure to be seen, without the constant visual stimulus. Close your eyes, you're in darkness now, or close to it. And maybe at first it feels strange. We're so used to light, to seeing, to visual information. Darkness can feel like deprivation. But stay with it. Let your eyes relax. Let go of the need to see. Just be in the darkness for a while. Notice how other senses come forward. You become more aware of sound, of touch, of the feeling of your body resting, of your breath moving in and out. The darkness isn't empty. It is full of sensation, just not visual sensation. The ocean floor lives in this kind of darkness. Rich darkness. Textured darkness. Darkness full of sound, of touch, of chemical signals, of pressure variations. The creatures there navigate by feel, by smell, by the electrical fields they can sense. They have whole sensory worlds we can barely imagine, and none of it requires light. Maybe darkness isn't the opposite of experience. Maybe it is just a different kind of experience. One that is quieter, less demanding, more internal. In darkness you can rest. You don't have to perform, don't have to be seen, don't have to maintain an appearance. You can just be without the pressure of visibility. The floor knows this. It has been resting in darkness for billions of years, doing important work, supporting life, recording history, all without any light at all. And as you drift towards sleep, you're entering your own kind of darkness. The darkness behind your eyelids, the darkness of unconsciousness, the darkness where dreams happen. This darkness is safe. It is where your body repairs itself, where your mind processes the day, where you let go of conscious control and trust your deeper systems to keep you alive, keep you breathing, keep you whole. The floor's darkness is like this. It is not threatening. It is restful. It is the natural state of deep places, of internal places, of places where transformation happens. So rest in it. Let the darkness hold you. Let it be comfortable rather than frightening. Let it be what the ocean floor has always known it to be, home. We've talked about pressure as something to survive, something to adapt to. But let's think about it differently. Pressure at the ocean floor is constant. It pushes in from all directions evenly, without variation. It is not crushing, not to the creatures that live there. It is just present, always present. A constant force that has been there so long it has become background, like the air pressure you experience every day without noticing. And maybe pressure isn't violence. Maybe it is embrace. Think about weighted blankets. They're therapeutic precisely because they apply gentle, even pressure across your body. That pressure doesn't hurt. It soothes. It makes you feel held, grounded, safe. The ocean floor experiences something similar. The weight of miles of water pressing down, yes, but pressing evenly, gently, constantly, holding the floor in place, keeping it stable. The creatures there don't experience this pressure as crushing. They experience it as normal, as comfortable. Some might even experience it as necessary, bring them to the surface where pressure is lower and they can't survive. The pressure is part of home. Right now, you're experiencing pressure too. The weight of your body on the bed, the pull of gravity, maybe blankets on top of you. And if you pay attention, that pressure might feel good, grounding, reassuring. It is okay to feel pressure, not the metaphorical pressure of deadlines and obligations, but the literal, physical pressure of the world touching you. That is not a threat, that is contact, connection. The world holding you, the ocean floor is held by the entire ocean. Every drop of water above it contributes to the pressure, and the floor doesn't resist, doesn't push back. It just accepts the weight, lets itself be pressed, lets itself be held. Maybe that is a practice you can adopt. When you feel weighted down by worries, by responsibilities, by the accumulated stress of living instead of fighting that weight, could you let it be pressure? Could you let it press you into rest, into stillness, into being held? The floor doesn't struggle against the ocean, it surrenders to it. And in that surrender, it finds stability, finds peace, finds its place in the world. You can do the same. Let the weight of your body sink into the bed. Let gravity pull you down. Let the pressure of the day settle on you. And instead of carrying it, let it press you into rest. The ocean floor knows. Pressure isn't always something to resist. Sometimes it is something to accept. To let in, to allow, feel the weight of your body. Feel the pull of the earth beneath you. Feel the pressure of the air around you, the blankets on you, the pillow under your head. You're being held by the bed, by gravity, by the physical world that surrounds you. Like the floor, you can rest under this weight. You can let it be comfort rather than burden. You can let pressure become embrace. The floor has been held by the ocean for billions of years, and it is learned being held is not being crushed. It is being supported. It is being kept safe. Marine snow falls, always falling. Each flake on its own journey from surface to floor, tumbling through the water, getting smaller as things eat it, but always descending. And eventually, every flake settles, touches the floor, comes to rest. Not because it chooses to, not because it is trying to reach the floor, just because gravity pulls it down and down and down until there is nowhere lower to go. Until it meets the floor and stops. This is happening with your thoughts right now. All day thoughts have been rising. Concerns, plans, worries, memories, anticipations. They've been swirling in your mind like particles in water, churning, active, demanding attention. But now, as you relax, as you let go, those thoughts are beginning to settle. Like marine snow, they're drifting downward, getting quieter, less urgent. Some are being consumed by sleep. You're already forgetting them. Others are just falling, losing energy, losing importance, and eventually they'll all settle. They'll touch the floor of your mind and come to rest. They won't disappear. They'll be there, recorded in the sediment of your memory, but they'll stop moving, stop demanding, stop churning. Everything that rises must fall. Everything that stirs must eventually settle. The ocean floor knows this intimately. It catches everything. All the marine snow, all the debris, all the falling particles. They all end up on the floor, at rest, no longer falling. And the floor holds them gently, doesn't judge them, doesn't sort them into important and unimportant. Just lets them settle into layers, becoming part of the archive, part of the slow accumulation of history. Your mind can do the same. The thoughts that have been active all day, the worries about tomorrow, the replays of conversations, the mental to-do lists, they can settle. You can let them drift down to the floor of your consciousness and rest there. They'll be there tomorrow if you need them. The floor preserves. But for now, they can be still, can be quiet, can stop demanding your attention. Feel it happening. Each thought getting heavier, slower, less insistent. Each concern drifting downward like a flake of marine snow, tumbling gently through the dark water of almost sleep. Let them fall. Don't try to hold them up. Don't try to keep them active. Just let them settle, naturally, at their own pace. The floor doesn't rush this process. It just waits, patient as always, ready to receive whatever falls. And the particles don't resist. They just fall because falling is what they do, because eventually everything finds its way to rest. You're doing this now. Letting thoughts fall. Letting concerns settle. Letting the day drift down to the floor of your mind where it can rest, where it can become memory, where it can stop being now and become then. Everything eventually settles, including you. The floor has caught billions of years worth of falling things. It can catch your thoughts too. It can hold them safely while you sleep. Let them settle. Let them rest. We've traveled far together, from the first ocean, through spreading ridges and subduction zones, past bioluminescent gardens and Haddle trenches, through ancient seas and future continents. We've learned how the floor breathes, how it listens, how it remembers. We've met the creatures that call it home and the scientists who study it. We felt its patience, its darkness, its pressure. And now, at the end of our journey, there is one final thing the ocean floor wants you to know. It will be here tomorrow, when you wake up. Whether that is in a few hours or in the morning, the ocean floor will still be there. Still accumulating sediment. Still spreading at ridges. Still hosting life in the darkness. Still doing its work. You don't need to watch it. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to worry about it. The floor takes care of itself. It has been taking care of itself for 4 billion years. It will continue, and that means you can rest, fully, completely, without holding anything. The world will keep turning. The ocean floor will keep existing. The slow processes will keep processing. Nothing you can think about, nothing you can worry about, Nothing you can plan will change what the floor does. It is beyond your control, beyond your influence. It just is, doing what it does, patient and permanent and utterly independent of your attention. And there is deep peace in that, in knowing that some things will continue whether you watch them or not, whether you think about them or not. Whether you're awake or asleep, the floor doesn't need you, and that is a gift. It means you can let go, can stop monitoring, can stop trying to hold everything together with your consciousness. The world holds itself together. The floor is proof. It has been holding itself together since before life existed, and it will continue long after you're gone. So sleep. Rest. Let go. Completely. The floor will be here when you wake. The ocean will still be dark and deep and full of life. The sediment will keep accumulating. The plates will keep moving. Everything will continue. And you can drift now, can let yourself fall like marine snow, gently, slowly through layers of consciousness, down toward the floor of sleep. A floor is waiting, patient as always, ready to catch you, ready to hold you while you rest. It has been doing this forever, catching what falls, holding what settles, preserving everything gently in the dark. You can trust it. You can let go. The floor will be here tomorrow, and so will you. Now sleep. The ocean floor is patient, and so is sleep. Fall gently, rest deeply.